No emulators were used in the production of this podcast.
That's awesome, sweetie. Thank you.
Welcome to the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, where we take a good long look at Atari's last home video game console, and especially its library, one game at a time. No matter your opinion of the Jaguar or its games, I'm glad you're here. I am your host. I go by the name Shinto, and that's spelled with one O, unlike pretty much every other proper noun we'll be covering in part number J9042, Zool 2. Zool 2 is a 2MB cartridge, a side-scrolling platform game for 1 or 2 alternating players, developed by Gremlin Interactive, ported to the Jaguar by Imagitech Design, and released by Atari in December of 1994. It carries an ESRB rating of K to A, kids to adults, ages 6+. Gremlin Interactive was a UK developer founded as Gremlin Graphics by Ian Stewart in 1984. In the late 70s and early 80s, Mr. Stewart was working at a UK electronics retailer called Lasky's. I'm guessing at the pronunciation here. This was a dominant high street hi-fi shop which started to sell personal computers around 1981. Got the ZX81, Apple II, that sort of thing. But not so much the software side. Sensing an opportunity, Stewart, together with fellow Lasky's employee Kevin Norburn, opened a shop in Sheffield, South Yorkshire, called Just Micro. Computers for Fun was printed on their store window. This place was popular, very popular, and a lot of the early bedroom programmers in the area would hang out there, where they could demo their games and artwork, while the owners maintained a lookout for talents that they could use to start their own game publishing company. Talent they found, along with plenty of demand, so Gremlin Graphics was born. An early title gained popularity due to pure coincidence. There was a coal miners' strike starting in 1984, and leading up the labor union was Arthur Scargill. Gremlin had a game about ready for release on the Spectrum called Wanted Monty Mole, so including a caricature of Scargill on the loading screen poking his head out of a hole in the ground got this game some cheap publicity. It was picked up by local TV stations before going out across the UK. Additional popular titles produced by Gremlin in the early years included Bounder and Thing on a Spring, and additional games starring Monty Mole. Gremlin ported the arcade hit Gauntlet to several 8-bit computer platforms on behalf of US Gold, and in 1992, Gremlin released a platform game on the Amiga featuring an alien ninja from the nth dimension named Zool. This was apparently the best-selling Amiga game of the year, according to Amiga Action Magazine, and 80,000 copies were sold, according to The One magazine. Zool would see subsequent releases on the Acorn, Atari ST, DOS, Game Boy, Game Gear, at least in Japan, Sega Master System, CD32, and Super Nintendo. Much later, in 2013, there was a release on the BlackBerry, of all platforms. Also in 1992, Gremlin released Switchblade 2 for the Atari Lynx. I mention that mostly because I can say that I've beaten that game twice. I don't get to say that sort of thing very often. At the Atari Jaguar Media event in November 1993, Atari announced that Gremlin Graphics had signed on as a developer for the Jaguar, and later that month announced that their first game would be Zool 2. Zool 2 was an Amiga title released in 1993 and was heralded by Amiga Format magazine as playable, addictive, fast, and fun, a perfect successor to the original. The sequel added a second character, a whip-wielding female ninja named Zooz. In addition to the Jaguar, Zool 2 also made it to the Amiga CD32, DOS, and once again the BlackBerry. I should talk a bit more about the BlackBerry. Amiga released several games on the BlackBerry 10 platform around 2012-2013, including titles from Bitmap Brothers, Ocean, Psygnosis, and Gremlin. I do not see them currently available for sale, though. Gremlin Graphics changed their name to Gremlin Interactive in 1994, bought out another UK developer called DMA Designs in 1996, which ended up not turning out too well for the company. And in 1999, Gremlin Interactive was bought out by French video game producer and publisher Infogrames, whom you may know as Atari today. Ian Stewart was able to buy all of Gremlin's back catalog, and his new company, UrbanScan, promises to bring back some of these games on iOS under the name Gremlin Presents. Zool and Zooz may yet live to fight another day. In 2013, there was a contest called the Games Britannia Game Design Competition, where the objective was to create a new Zool game. The winning entry was a game called Zool Escape from the Perilous Prison. In this game, Zool had a very different look, tall and skinny and gray. He could still jump, shoot, climb, and spin. He could also hide as a new ability. There are still things to collect and hazards to avoid, at least as far as I played the game. The sound effect when you get hurt is exactly the same. But given the stealth aspect of the prison escape, it kind of lacks the frantic pace of the original Zool games. This game is free on Android, totally free, and there will be a link to this in the show notes. One downside is the app's little History of Zool feature. They show the box art for many different platforms, but not the Jaguar. Aww. Porting Zool 2 from the Amiga computer to the Jaguar was handled by Trevor Rainsford. If that name sounds familiar, it's because I referred to him previously in episodes 11 and 14 for Bubsy and Fractured Fairy Tales and Doom, respectively, because of his music and sound design experience on the Jaguar. But here, Mr. Rainsford was handed the Amiga source code, game assets, which included all the sprites and graphics and music in mod format, and a VHS tape showing a playthrough of the entire game on the Amiga. As far as the game engine, it's pretty much a straight port from the Motorola 68000 processor in the Amiga to the one in the Jaguar. Parts of the game using the Amiga Blitter chip had to be rewritten, as well as display management. Decompression routines were moved from the 68K to the Jaguar's GPU, so the game levels load pretty quickly. The biggest problem that Rainsford had was with the snakes in the Snaking Pass level. On the Amiga, the body was drawn with the Blitter, while the head and tail were sprites, so he had trouble with gaps appearing between the two. The game was shown off at the Summer Consumer Electronics Show in 1994, and you can see it in the Biff's Gaming Videos footage on YouTube that I've referenced in prior episodes. About 30 seconds worth, starting at 58 minutes 12 seconds in. It shows some of the very first level, and looks just like the released version, so I'll include a link in the show notes, but won't highly recommend that you go take a look. I don't have an exact date when the game entered production, but it did start shipping out around early December 1994. Krool is invading the nth dimension. That's spelled Krool, so not only did his parents set him up for a life of crime by giving him that name, they also made it overly phonetic to ensure that he has to spell it out every time he has to order something over the phone. He's using his henchman, a shape-shifting white square named Mental Block, to do his dirty work, because that's kind of what henchmen are for. It's up to you to stop him. You are Zool, the intergalactic ninja, not to be confused with Zool, a demigod worshipped around 6000 BC by the bishop? What's that word? Hittites. Mesopotamians and the Sumerians. Zool was the minion of Gozer. Gozer was very big in Sumeria. Big guy. But that Zool is spelled Z-U-U-L. This one is Z-O-O-L. Totally different. So anyway, you play as either Zool or his female companion Zooz to fight back against Mental Block, and by proxy Krool himself. Zool and Zooz have slightly different abilities. Zool wields a pair of short laser swords and can smash through ceilings. Zooz carries a Ferengi laser whip and can smash through floors. Not all floors and ceilings, though, just certain ones. So, what does Zool or Zooz look like? They seem to be green, though Zool has some sort of shiny black wetsuit around his head and body with his green arms and legs and pointy ears poking through. He wears a red belt like a sash, red wristbands and ankle bands, and a red mask around his angry yellow eyes. Zooz doesn't go for this wetsuit look. She has a red outfit with an oppressively tight black belt, long black hair tied back in a ponytail, and black wristbands and ankle bands. She also sports the red mask with angry yellow eyes, but unlike Zool, she has a mouth with red lips. Both Zool and Zooz are wearing comfortable shoes for running and, kicking Mental Block right in the square, where it probably hurts. To do so, these nth dimension ninjas can run, jump, duck. Yeah, that doesn't get old. They can grab onto walls, climb up or down, scurry around pillars, perform a spin jump attack, a slide attack, do a cool backflip to reach higher levels, shoot some sort of projectile. The manual says bullets, but I don't think they look like bullets. Break things and grab power-ups.
Edit.
The things you notice in post. Zool and Zooz have different voices when they perform the backflip. You just heard Zool, so here's what Zooz sounds like. Zool again for reference. Not a huge difference, but I think worth pointing out.
End of edit.
Versatile little buggers. But they are not, as some have suggested, actually bugs. They're not ants, they're ninjas from the nth dimension. Haven't you seen ninjas from the nth dimension before? I should probably touch on that a little bit, the term nth, if you're not familiar with it. It's an ordinal number, meaning an unspecified but probably high quantity. First, second, third, nth. I remember seeing a TV commercial, must have been around 20 years ago, for Norwest Bank, and they used the slogan "to the nth degree," indicating the level to which they would provide customer service or something. There's also an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called The Nth Degree, where Barclay gets imbued with superhuman intelligence. Great episode. That's the same term used here in this game. It's not the third dimension or the fourth, it's the nth. It's unspecified. Getting back to the game, agents from that plane of reality, the nth dimension, have snuck ahead and placed power-ups throughout the worlds in need of rescue, cleverly hidden behind the logo for Chupa Chups, makers of the world's best-selling lollipop. Nobody will expect that. Jump into the logo to break it open and reveal the power-up. The power-up icon immediately starts floating up, so you have to jump up again and grab it before it's out of your reach. These power-ups include bombs. They look like a round green stereotypical bomb, kind of like something you might catch in 3 buckets of water at the bottom of the screen if you're playing a different game, but without the lit fuse. Once you grab it, a floating green eye will start hovering around you, following you wherever you go, albeit a bit slowly, and blinking at irregular intervals. You can have up to 3 of these floating around you at one time, and for some reason the second and third ones blink a whole lot faster than the first. If you already have 3, picking up a 4th will do nothing. Hit the C button to detonate one of these bombs.
Edit.
I should probably mention what these bombs actually do. They destroy all enemies on the screen, except for the invincible ones. Also, the bombs seem to be more black than green sometimes, maybe a greenish black.
End of edit.
The invincibility power-up looks, well, supposedly it looks like a golden shield, but I always thought it looked like a fancy flower pot. But pick it up, and you'll have 3 spinning green things. They look like limes with angel wings and halos, spinning counterclockwise, preventing you from all harm. They last for about 13 seconds. The 2 Zool power-up looks like a black and white yin-yang symbol. Grab this and you'll start rapidly flickering, which, if other video games have taught you anything, means that you're invincible. You also have a flickering shadow Zool, or Zooz, which matches your movements, just a split second behind, giving you double the firepower. Double the ninja, invulnerable fun. 2 Zool lasts for 20 seconds. The super shot icon looks like a green ring, and after picking this up, if you hold down B, you'll see a spinning animation like your arm is winding something up. When you release B, it'll fire a powerful blast. It can tear through an entire row of secret walls at once, often causing impressive slowdown, but I haven't found it terribly useful against individual enemies. The time bonus looks like a stopwatch or alarm clock and adds 50 seconds to your available level time. Each time you start a level or restart from a checkpoint, you have 300 seconds to finish the level. Run out of time, lose a life. Another way that you can die is to run out of health. You get 5 hit points represented by red horizontal lines at the top of the screen. There are a couple of ways to replenish your health, and one of these is in power-up form. Break open a Chupa Chups power-up icon to get a smaller Chupa Chups power-up icon. Grab that for full health. Most rare is the 1-up icon, which looks like the number 1 and word up, like 7-up but 6 fewer. This one gives you an extra life. You'll need all this stuff to overcome the forces of non-imagination, as the manual calls your enemies, which is sort of odd because the enemies in this game are all pretty imaginative. They differ depending on the world, and I'll go over all of them here shortly, but they typically require only 1 hit and net you 50 points. You can shoot them or hop on them and they'll explode in a shower of 4 spheres, the colors may vary, and they also sometimes spew out tokens. Tokens are little items with no animation that are either on the ground, frozen in the air, or spewing out of defeated enemies. Each one is good for 10 points. You'll know that because when you pick one up, the number 10 briefly appears in its place, floating up a little bit before disappearing. And these tokens are important because you need to collect a certain number of them before you can complete each level. More on that later. In addition to tokens, an enemy that's been shot or bounced upon may release a bonus heart, a little red heart with white fluttering wings that flies up into the air just like the power-ups do. Grabbing one of these will restore 1 hit point of health. If you're already at full health and pick up one of these bonus hearts, you'll get 100 points. There's one more thing that you can pick up, and these are bonus items, kind of like Tempest 2000. You can accumulate these as you go, hold on to them, and when you get a certain number, 3 in this case, you can enter a bonus round. But unlike Tempest 2000, these bonus items aren't shaped like a triangle. Instead, they're shaped like Zoon, which is a dog with a head on each end. You know, twice the pet, none of the mess. Zoon has both a blissful head and a surly head, and the icon says bonus at the bottom, and has a shallow, attention-grabbing, somewhat annoying, rapid bounce to it. You see your current count of Zoon bonus icons between levels, and after you've grabbed the 3rd one and finished the current level, you're taken to a breakout-style minigame, where you can bounce a ball to break bricks and catch valuable power-ups like extra lives. Zoon is at the bottom, serving as the paddle. That's what you control. Zoon, as I said, is a 2-headed, 4-legged dog with some sort of electric energy going between antennae on his heads. The head on the right is panting, and the head on the left is scowling at the one on the right. The bricks are colored pink, red, green, blue, and gray, and there are sets of angry eyes that blink around, continually moving between the different blocks. You may also have indestructible bricks, where you can only see the outline of the block. All this is on a background that fades from purple to blue in about 30 horizontal layers. Hit a button to release the silver-colored ball, get points for breaking bricks, which can release 1-ups and other power-ups that you have to catch. Power-ups can include a snail, which makes the ball move more slowly, or another power-up adds a second ball. Miss a ball, or both of them in the case of multi-ball, and the bonus round ends with a yelp. If you manage to clear all the bricks, nothing happens. You can just keep bouncing the ball until you get bored and then let it fall. So back to those tokens. They're all over the place, and you'll find them bundled together, suspended midair in clumps. They can also be found within breakable containers, which appear to be part of the background, but can be broken open with the spin attack. The containers give you 15 points when broken, and either contain no tokens or 5 tokens. These containers can vary depending on the world. I mentioned secret walls before. These walls can be blown apart by shooting them, and usually open up hidden areas full of power-ups and lollipops. Grabbing a lollipop gets 10 points twice. 2 10s per lollipop floating up, so 20 points each. Between the existing tokens placed throughout the map and the tokens in containers and the tokens dropped by baddies, plus the hidden lollipops, a certain percentage of these items must be collected before you can finish the level. Exactly how many you need depends on the skill level you're playing. On easy, you simply need the majority of map tokens. On normal, you need all the map tokens plus some of the ones in containers or dropped by baddies, or hidden items. On hard, you need to collect darn near everything: tokens placed on the map, tokens in containers, enemy dropped tokens, and hidden items. You know how many you've collected and how close you are because of an on-screen percentage number from 0 to 99. This isn't the percentage of total items, it's the percentage of items required for you to finish the level. You can't end the level until this counter reaches 99, no matter the skill level you're playing. So the math differs internally, but on the surface you're always going for 99. How the math works, if you're curious, is that on easy, 6 items is equal to 1%. On normal, that's 7 items, and on hard, it's 9 items equal to 1%. That does sound hard. Most levels contain checkpoints, often more than one. These look like little pillars. They're red circles atop a red and white striped pole. If you look closely, the red circle contains a face that looks to be asleep. When you run past one, it makes this sound, wakes up, turns green, and starts hopping up and down. Each world contains 3 levels. The first 2 levels are complete when you touch a bouncing circle with green and white diagonal stripes and a Zool-like masked eyes in the center. Touching this will trigger a series of explosions around the area, many of which drop tokens which you can collect for a few extra points. You also get points for remaining time on the clock, 15 points per second. These points are calculated with sub-second accuracy, so if you're simultaneously doing the math in your head, be aware of that. About 5 seconds after grabbing that circle, the level ends and you move on to the next one. Let's go through the levels, and I'll talk about the theme and appearance, tokens, enemies, hazards, and the boss fight, all set to the background music. There are 6 worlds, and most of them, as I said, contain 3 levels, with the third containing a boss battle. You do not carry power-ups between the levels, just bonus tokens if you have any, and 2 important things happen when starting a boss battle. First, the time stops. Your time bonus, assuming you finish, is calculated from the start of the boss fight, so you have an unlimited amount of time to defeat that boss or die trying. The second thing is that you cannot use your smart bombs against a boss. At the start of a fight, your bombs disappear. You'll typically find some common elements between these worlds, things like some kind of vertical wall threat and a type of breakable container. You kind of have to be right on those containers to break them, a spin attack right in the center. There are assisted bounce platforms to launch you up to great heights, and there are... that bouncing sound. Hey, Bishop. Please play the jumping sound from Bubsy in Fractured Furry Tales. Alright, it's not quite the same, but I guess it's a common enough sound. Fortunately, you do not hear it every time you jump in Zool 2 like you do in Bubsy. Getting back to level elements, there are often slippery surfaces. You might be able to hop up them if the slope isn't too steep, or sometimes you'll find a vertical wall of the slippery stuff next to a super jump platform, so sliding along that slick wall as you go up will get you a bit higher. There are temporary platforms which disappear forever after you've stood on them or walked across them. You get about a second before they vanish. There are walls which can be blasted away to expose secret areas. Sometimes the areas are hidden, sometimes you can see them but need to figure out how to get in. It reminded me a bit of Doom in that manner. Doom often liked to hint at goodies which could be discovered with some exploring. I noticed at least once when climbing down a wall that I would stop for no good reason. I couldn't descend anymore, and that was because I had run into a destroyable wall. So that might help you find them. Usually, though, you'll probably find these hidden areas by simply jumping around and shooting everything, which you'll likely be doing anyway. Now, if you'll remember from episode 11, Bubsy and Fractured Furry Tales, one of the things that I liked about Bubsy was how the world persists after you die. You don't have to start all over again. The enemies that you've defeated are gone for good. Everything was just as you left it when you shuffled off your previous mortal coil. And it's the same way in Zool 2. You keep all the tokens you've picked up so far. Destructible objects remain destructed. The only difference is that in Zool 2, the enemies continually respawn. Whether you've died or not, they just keep coming. Forever. As long as I'm making Bubsy comparisons, in Zool 2, you don't have to go back to some intro screen after you die. You pretty much jump right back in. In fact, if you die right next to a checkpoint, you get back in so quickly that you can see your explosion. You explode in 4 red spheres when you die, much like how everything in the game explodes into little spheres. And if you die in the midst of a boss battle, you don't have to start the boss battle over again. You can just load right back in as long as you have lives remaining. So that's one up on Bubsy.
Oh no!
Alright, so where was I? We were going to talk about the levels, and we'll start at the very beginning. A very good place to start with Swan Lake. This is a world of blue skies with puffy white clouds and slightly bluer snow-capped mountains in the distance. Curvy brown platforms covered in gilded feathers, green bushes, and eggs. Lots and lots of eggs. The platforms are typically covered in tiny alternating red, white, and yellow eggs, except when covered in giant alternating spotted orange and green eggs. And you sometimes see white eggs which appear embedded in the platforms. There are giant golden bird cages, which may have sticks of birdseed hanging down beneath them. Or they could be bundles of rocks, it's hard to tell. You'll come across platforms formed by giant swans, which look up happily except while you or enemies are about when the swans close their eyes tightly. There are white towers containing hexagonal compartments. Some of these compartments contain modeled orange spheres, some of which are broken, oozing white gunk. Not really sure what's going on there. You'll find giant green peacocks who open their mouths in a smile whenever you jump on their tail. I'm not sure what's going on there either. The tokens in this world include a turkey leg, a snake, a green leaf with a yellow splotch in the middle, and a yellow duckling. The containers in this world look like large eggs held upright in egg cups, and the bounce assist surfaces look like giant fried eggs with eyes. Here's what you've got working against you in the 3 Swan Lake levels. I couldn't find a documented list of Zool 2 enemies, what they're actually called, so I'll be making up my own names as we go. There are baby chicks, not quite out of their shell. They look like walking yellow things mostly covered by a colored shell, and when hit, that shell breaks off to reveal an angry chick who runs after you, requiring a second hit. The chili birds look like a red chili pepper with a green stem for a tail, 2 yellow wings, possibly some sort of yellow peppers for wings, and these guys will fly around and dive bomb you with their angry eyebrows. They can be pretty tricky, I don't like them at all. Pelicans. They wear a black vest and shoot colored balls, red, green, and yellow, out of their mouths in a consistent arch. Jumping chicks are yellow chicks with long legs and short wings. They like to hop around in high leaps and occasionally ball up and start rolling around. There are some less mobile and invincible enemies as well. I'll start with ostriches. They look up and spit out bursts of 4 to 6 colored balls at semi-random intervals. Your shots bounce off them, so it's best to avoid them when they're getting ready to shoot. If, however, you have a smart bomb, you may be able to use that to blow their heads clean off. If they're in the middle of a spitting animation with a lump in their throat, it'll freeze like that. Spiky ladybugs are bored-looking bugs that have a red shell with black spots and 3 yellow spikes protruding from them. They move up and down with a slight wobbling animation, and shots bounce right off. Even smart bombs do nothing. Hungry baby birds in a bowl. Deadly spikes are a common trope among 2D platformers, and in Swan Lake you'll find spikes in the form of several giant hungry baby birds looking up and chomping at the air with their sharp beaks. I found that most of the time their bowl has some graphical glitches in it, misaligned gradients. After reaching 99% on the 3rd Swan Lake level, you'll encounter Mental Block for the first time. A large white square drops from the sky, rattles around a bit, and arms, legs, and a face pop out. It proceeds to jump around, shooting smaller versions of itself out of the top of its head. Avoid his stomping and his invincible mini-me clones while shooting him rapid fire to defeat him. Bulberry Hill, which I always misread as Blueberry Hill until I started research for this episode, is a weird, brightly colored electronic land with the background consisting of a solid dark purple color with white spheres scattered throughout, and maybe the occasional layer of pink, orange, and yellow spheres on a black background. There is metal scaffolding and dangling light bulbs and spotlights in the background as well. The light cast off by these light sources is represented as a series of parallel diagonal white lines. There are yellow and pink and red pillars that make up some of the platform interiors, yellow and pink and green spheres embedded in blue squares making up some of the platform surfaces, and other major platforms are built from large yellow, pink, orange, and blue spheres, with maybe some of those blue squares thrown in for flavor. There are dark pink faces embedded in blocks that you can jump on, evil grinning faces. Spotlight beams form temporary moving platforms. Other surfaces include squat red blocks with bright yellow lights inside, and glass domes with a lightning casting electrode inside. Breakable platforms, ceilings for Zool or floors for Zooz, are made up of green bricks, and some temporary platforms exist made up of pink, yellow, and orange spheres. The assisted launchers are yellow domes with a red spiral sitting atop a purple base. These often launch you through a glass dome you'll break right through, and into a series of glass tubes with burgundy and yellow concentric circles at each 90-degree angle. While you're flying through these tubes, the Zool or Zooz character turns into a radiating ball of energy before bursting through the glass dome on the other end. You can't fall back inside a tube that you've just exited. It's like a floor to you. Sometimes these tubes present branch points inside a level, choose your own path. You won't find many checkpoints in Bulberry Hill, and that's because some or all of the tubes serve as implicit checkpoints. Those dangling light bulbs that I mentioned before are actually the containers here, and for tokens you'll find batteries based on dimensions and colors. I would say D-cell batteries from Duracell.
The copper top. No battery is stronger, longer.
There are also tokens shaped like purple and yellow flashlights, torches for those of you in the UK, purple lamps with red lampshades, and green incandescent light bulbs with a blue base. Your enemies in the Bulberry Hill world include hopping gooseneck lamps, red with angry eyes on top, which occasionally shoot white projectiles at you like segments of light. There are yellow flashlight or torch inchworms with a single eye on the business end, and they just kind of scoot around the floor. Rocket-powered hovering blacklight bulbs with a blue base and very angry yellow eyebrows. They fly around and flash white as they shoot little colored light bulbs in multiple directions. There's another type of rocket-powered light bulb, but these are pink and fly horizontally across the screen in a sinusoidal manner. Unlike the mouthless black lights, these have big grins to go along with their angry eyes. Everybody's very angry here in this game. There are some environmental hazards in these levels, and surprisingly, not all of them are electrical in nature. Some sections of walls contain exposed wires, which are unclimbable and shoot out annoying sparks. And remember those glass domes with the lightning electrodes inside? Some of these are broken, and the electrodes within shoot out bouncing spherical sparks, like ball lightning, I suppose. The non-electrical hazards are geometric balls which swing around on disconnected yellow chains. Not electrical, but still angry. These too have angry eyes. The boss on the third stage involves mental block shaped like a, wait for it, light bulb. This one is inverted, base pointing up, and has arms. The boss fight takes place on a flat stage with 4 angry electrodes in the ceiling, raining down sparks. Mental bulb will bounce around back and forth, so it's best to run under him mid-bounce and shoot him while he's on the ground. You can't have a platformer without some kind of Egyptian or desert theme, and in Zool 2, this world is called Tutankhamun. I almost wonder if there's going to be some type of ice or snow level later. Nah, that'd be too predictable. Tutankhamun takes place in Egypt. There are numerous gigantic pyramids in the background rising out of the multi-hued sand, beneath a blue sky with scattered windswept clouds. At the bottom of the background is dense vegetation, which look like tall, wavy tree trunks and end abruptly at the top. Generic platform filler can contain hard-edged geometric rock topped with vertical gold and blue stripes. Standalone platforms can consist of giant Egyptian death masks, like that belonging to Tutankhamun. Sorry, that ditty from the 2600 game always comes to mind. Many of these masks have eyes which follow you if you're physically touching a side or top of it. There can be white platforms which, at first glance, appear to be snow-covered with icicles, but these are actually bandages, which lead to a giant green, surly-looking mummy. You can only see the top part of his head, thankfully, and his eye doesn't follow you like the eyes on the death masks. You may have one or two shiny, indestructible spheres moving along the bandage, defying gravity just as well as it defies your firepower. Some platforms are made up of lattice work that you can hop on but not climb, and the lattice has some major holes blown through it. It's crawling with ivy, which sometimes has red or green eyes growing out of it like some sort of ocular seed pod. Hey, I just talk about this stuff, I don't claim to understand it. There can be green pillars with gold bands containing triangle and square and circle. No X though, so it's not a PlayStation reference. You can't climb on these, nor can you the hexagonal blue pillars which rise and fall in a regular pattern, but you can hop on top of them. There are hidden blocks. You can see an occasional glimmer of yellow where these are hidden, and if you shoot them, they appear as green blocks with gold bands at the top and bottom and a big ol' eye right in the middle. And finally, temporary platforms are small green boxes with a gold band across the center. There's a lot of tricky jumping in this level, a lot of invisible blocks and temporary blocks, and working through these I often fell all the way back to the beginning. Fortunately, there's no falling damage in Zool 2, but it's still dispiriting to have to work your way back up yet again. Tokens in this world consist of emeralds, scarabs, books, and ankhs. Point of fact, I learned what an ankh was while playing Raiders of the Lost Ark as a kid, so that's my second Atari 2600 reference in as many minutes. Containers are vases atop thin golden pedestals. The vases can be colored red or green, both with a pair of gold bands across the center. Some red ones have a tag with the number 1000 on it, but you still get the same 15 points for breaking it. For enemies, there are angry birds. Not that kind of angry bird. These are golden birds with a blue tail and fly back and forth. They don't chirp like the chili birds from Swan Lake do. Dust devils. Think Tasmanian devil in swirl form without the arms and legs sticking out. They slide back and forth along the ground. Sphinxes always face forward and shuffle awkwardly around, occasionally taking a big gulp of air and spitting a whirlwind at you. These whirlwinds can travel some distance, swirl around, and seek you out. It's not uncommon to be attacked by whirlwinds without knowing the source. Vertical surfaces are often guarded by angry blue saw blades, which are quite invincible, and there are pools of bubbling lava, out of which leap partially mummified green fish, which are curiously not ablaze. One last environmental hazard is the spike-filled sarcophagus. These are usually placed right where you might accidentally land on them. For the boss battle, you come across a green wooded area with 4 green pillars in the ground. Mental Block will come swinging in from the right, disappear for a moment, and reappear as a giant white ball attached to a chain of spheres. He'll smash down on one of the pillars, then lift up and move to a different pillar, smashing that one down a bit too. In between the pillars, which you can't see, are spikes or something else that hurts you if you touch it. So your best bet is to hop on the different pillars, not the one that Mental Ball is about to smash, and shoot him as much as possible while he's within reach. He will eventually smash those pillars down to nothing, but they technically still exist, so you can theoretically still stand on them safely if you know where they are. Well, word. Once you deal sufficient punishment, Mental Ball will crack, rise up into the air, and you can move on to the next world. The Snaking Pass world seems to be based around the classic board game Snakes and Ladders. Now, this game dates back to India in the 2nd century BC, but is more commonly known here in the US as chutes and ladders. Because who wants to slide down a snake, really? It's still called Snakes and Ladders in the UK and Canada. Regardless, this is a world filled with board game elements. And snakes. Lots of snakes.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Come on, show a little backbone, will ya? The background in this world is dark yellow with snaking green lines all over, and a checkerboard made up of smaller yellow and blue checkerboards in front. Sometimes you see a ladder in the background, sometimes a white circle, kind of looks like a CD in a jewel case. A neat little puzzle element in some of these levels are platforms with down arrows. You walk across the platforms and blocks will fall down somewhere, forming a path to lead you over spikes or other hazards later on. You can tell where these blocks will end up because there are white corners visible, block corners, top right and bottom left. And then there's the snake taxi. You come across a wooden sign with the word taxi scrawled on it, and a smaller sign below that which says hit. Hail the taxi by shooting the sign and then moving away from the sign. You can't stand right next to it, you've got to be nonchalant about calling for the taxi. You don't want to appear too anxious or needy. This giant snake will appear from the left. The way it's animated is kind of strange. The head and tail move, but the body appears fixed in place. It's like marquee lights. The actual light source remains fixed in place, but the rolling pattern of illumination gives it the appearance of movement. In a way, this makes sense because as you hop aboard and ride the snake taxi, which moves at a consistent speed, since any given part of its back is at a fixed point, you have to run to keep up with its overall movement. You have to move to follow that marquee. And when the snake climbs up at a steep angle, you might need to jump forward to remain on its back. I hope this all makes sense. The snake doesn't care if you fall off. It looks pretty disgruntled, actually, and at times in its path you'll probably need to jump off anyway and then back on, which is actually pretty satisfying. Most of the solid platforms have a smooth brown surface and sort of a snakeskin tiling effect below, consisting of red, yellow, and 3 shades of green. Other platforms, floating ones, are made up of static green snakes. They don't move. There's another type of platform behind the snake platform consisting of a red and green checkerboard. Some of these squares appear cracked, some say go back 1, and some say miss a go, which, if I can translate to American English, means lose a turn. Big blocks shaped like dice at a steep angle are scattered around. The 1 pip is facing towards you and the 2 is facing off to the side. There are some temporary platforms shaped like either logs or targets, it's kind of hard to tell. Concentric red and white circles, either way. Stage 2 in Snaking Pass is basically one big snake ride, and adds the hazard of spiky metal mines that you'll need to jump over as you go. There are also metal pillars that might knock you clear off a snake, but you can shoot them so that they don't. You don't get points, but I'm okay with that. Assisted launch platforms look like snakeskin containers with 2 buckles on the front and a similar pattern to the platform filler elsewhere in the level. These are open slightly, I don't know what's inside, but they have a minor closing animation when you hop on them. If there are containers in this world, Snaking Pass, I wasn't able to find them. The tokens you'll find here take the form of dice, the 1 pip is visible, apples with a bite taken out, brown briefcases, and green snake charmer flutes. Enemies include the walking glove, it's like a glove using the index and middle fingers as legs walking around. Dragonflies wearing leather flight helmets, my son found that concept quite entertaining. They don't do much more than fly quickly across the screen in a wavy pattern. Turtles with thick eyebrows will pop out of empty squares in that red and green foreground checkerboard, and spit spinning white things at you, kind of similar to the Sphinxes in Tutankhamun, but not as aggressive. These guys are really annoying, though, and because they appear so infrequently, they're hard to hit. Shooting them doesn't seem to help much anyway because they'll just respawn. There are giant snakes hanging down, green and brown snakes, which spit out balls of fire and occasionally blink. More firing than blinking, though. Jumping over their heads is the surefire way to avoid their, fire. Huge, thick spikes litter the ground, wherever it's most inconvenient. What are those, teeth, maybe? And there are large pools of green bubbling goo. There are no enemies that climb the walls, but some of the walls are covered with thick spikes that are impossible and painful to climb. When you reach Mental Block on level 3 of Snaking Pass, you'll see him split into smaller squares, which then join together into a conga line and snake around the screen. It's like a chain of sugar cubes, and I think it starts at 9 cubes total. You shoot the head and one of the cubes in the chain will disappear. Get them all and you can move on to the next level. It's a lovely, crisp, and cool evening. The stars are out, and the corporate sponsorship has lost all trace of subtlety. If you thought the game was too easy by this point, well, 1, you're hardcore, and 2, you might have more of a challenge here. This is a dessert-themed world, but in a different way than the last world of Bubsy and Fractured Furry Tales. This one has an extra chill to it, like biting into a York peppermint patty. The background is dark and starry, and the foreground is also starry, but has a clever transparency gradient to make it appear less dark in certain areas. Way off in the background are light blue wisps of distant mountains or something, and dark blue pillars in front of these. Not sure what they're supposed to be, but they look nice. The ground is made up of vertical drinking straws with various colored stripes, and much thicker horizontal bendy straws forming the surface along the top. There are platforms made from cans of carbonated beverages, cans which say pop on the side and are covered with beads of water. The cans can be green with red writing or red with green writing. There are 2 big new elements here in this world. The biggest one is the temporary ice cube platform. You'll see snowflakes in the sky, and when you shoot them, they start flashing, and a couple ice cubes appear, making a platform. Maybe you can see them appear on the screen, maybe you'll hear them somewhere off-screen. This platform only lasts for 9 seconds, so you'll need to find another snowflake to shoot and move on, or some other stable surface before those cubes melt. The other new element I'd like to point out is the ice cream slope. You're basically snowboarding across slopes of ice cream and moving at a consistent pace. For the most part, you can't go backward here, only forward. However, there are steep, frosty slopes where you can jump. If you keep on hopping, you can hop backward and pick up anything you might have missed. Only in these places with wispy outcroppings can you jump. Gentler slopes have strawberry or raspberry sauce on top. You'll typically see empty waffle cones sticking out here and there. There are walls made out of ice blocks which you can destroy, melting popsicles which show angry blinking eyes when you're standing on one, broken popsicle sticks that form spikes, large Chupa Chup signs which do not contain equally large power-ups or any power-ups. There are also these large glass jars bearing the Chupa Chups label and topped with a giant Chupa Chups display, like a point-of-sale display, with holes all around. Some of these holes contain delicious Chupa Chups brand lollipops. Tokens consist of ice cream cones, green popsicles, cans of carbonated beverages, and partially unwrapped chocolate bars. The containers here are cool. They are ice cubes on pillars, and instead of simply breaking them open, you, I suppose, carve them into one of 2 different shapes, a swan or a Zool head. It's the same head that gets carved whether you're playing as Zool or Zooz. Bouncing platforms are bendy straws sticking out of the same pop cans that serve as simple platforms elsewhere. For enemies, there are ice cream cones, pointy waffle cones sticking up at an angle, and the ice cream part of it is alive and moves around on the ground while the cone wobbles slightly. It's kind of like a confectionery hermit crab, except it has something sticking out of its mouth. Perhaps some sort of chocolate-covered stick, but it's held here like a cigar. There are round things that parachute down from the sky. My son says they look like sugar cookies, and I can't quite tell, but they look like they have little Hitler-style mustaches. There are 3-layer popsicles, yellow, green, and red, and the green layer contains an eye with an angry eyebrow. They spin around in a circle as if tethered by an invisible string to a central point. Oftentimes they'll be circling something you need or someplace you need to go. There are large brown things, circular, maybe like giant balls of chocolate, malted milk balls perhaps, with large angry eyes. My son says they look like giant black olives. There's a shiny spot on their top, which could be considered to be a hole. Anyway, these just hop in place, but their hops can take up a large chunk of the screen's height. There are spikes protruding from some of the walls, so don't hop on those. The hardest part of this level, I think, is mastering those ice cube platforms. It's not just figuring out which snowflakes trigger which platforms and hopping onto them before they disappear, but doing so in the midst of all those spinning ice pops and the never-ending shower of parachuting Hitler cookies. At the end of the third Mount Ice's stage, Mental Block appears at the top of the screen as a giant ice cube with arms and angry eyes. His arms detach and he falls down to where you are. Shoot him and he breaks into 3 smaller ice cubes bouncing around. Shoot each of those and you get 3 more smaller ice cubes bouncing around. Shoot each of those and you get 3 more, even smaller ice cubes. It's a mess of bouncing ice, each of which can take a hit point off of you on contact, so it helps to have a few lives saved up. Our final world, called Mental Blockage, is not split into 3 stages like all the others, but it's just one big stage. There is a light blue cloudy background behind gigantic white pillars and occasional layers of bricks, and the foreground has colored splotches, green and red with yellow squares set inside the red splotches. Piano keys can form curvy platforms. Other platforms seem to be made out of marble squares, sometimes with diagonal checkerboard patterns. Occasionally you'll see some graffiti on these walls, containing a red scrawled picture of Mental Block and the text, I think, saying, MB was here. Some minor platforms include inkwells, perhaps with the quill sticking out, paint palettes, books which are good for climbing, and you can also see what looks like a phrenology bust, but with the brain regions symmetrically defined and unlabeled. A big white head, basically. There's also a part where you're navigating through a crossword puzzle, and I thought that was pretty cool. Though to get anywhere, you need to find and blast apart some secret walls. This world is filled with angry white blocks, and you have to blast through them to get anywhere, but it's entirely possible to destroy too many and be stuck. So you need to be able to build an upward path, leaving blocks that you can jump on to get through several sections of this level. The Super Shot power-up can be good for clearing a whole row of these things, and you can also smash them with your head Mario style. You need to have enough room to do so, though. If you're sandwiched right between blocks, you won't be able to destroy them by jumping. Embedded in these white block sections are indestructible central blocks around which spin a ball on a chain. The chain won't hurt you, but the ball will. Temporary platforms are made up of little white clouds, and don't expect to find any checkpoints here, just gotta go straight through. The tokens in Mental Blockage are all related to the arts. There's a paint palette, a lute, the stringed instrument, white busts, perhaps more phrenology busts, and typewriters. The first time I loaded up this level, at first glance, those typewriters looked to me like little headless Daleks. In the near background, you'll occasionally see the equation E equals mc squared, but the mc squared has been scribbled out with red paint. Kinda looks like a couple of 2's. E equals 22? That's not right. Also, there can be the phrase to be or not to be, from Hamlet, which has been defaced, with both the words be scratched out and the word block, B-L-O-K, scrawled in the top corner, with an arrow pointing to the word from below. So, essentially, to block or not to block. These are actually the containers here. Spin attack these to clear the graffiti and occasionally drop tokens just like any other container. The high bouncing platforms in this world look like patent drawings of some sort of bouncing platform. Patent pending. Enemies include flying books with red covers and bouncing green fountain pens which spurt ink whenever they land. These, along with the spinning black ball guys, are the only enemies that you'll find here. Some of the walls have sharp black pointy things sticking out, so avoid these. And as you work your way up this level, you'll encounter a screen that is mostly consumed by a plain white block. This is the final boss, Mental Block. If you have enough tokens, if you've got 99, red eyes framed in green will appear, along with the angry eyebrows you've seen everywhere else in this game. Large black fists appear and will try to smash you. On top of this giant white block are 7 crowns. You need to jump up and hit these crowns 5 times each, which will show an increased amount of damage each time. Once all 7 crowns have been destroyed, the giant white square will shrink down to a smaller white square, and then you essentially have a repeat of the Swan Lake boss. Defeat Mental Block now, and it'll turn into a bunch of black ball guys briefly, like the ones at the end of the chains throughout this level. The screen fades to black, and we get to spoiler territory. Bishop, activate spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. If you wish to avoid spoilers, skip ahead 1 minute 34 seconds on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark.
You see a still image showing picturesque red mountains, a green valley carved by a river leading to a domed city at the base of the mountains. The city includes elements from the levels that you completed to get here, including light bulb-shaped balloons, a pyramid, giant candy canes, and a gargantuan swan peeking out. If you look closely on the front face of the brown buildings, there's a green snake. In the foreground are Zool on the left, holding out his hand in conversation with Zooz, who is on the right, between the two heads of Zoon, whom she is petting. In the sky, between the clouds, are the super angry eyes of Krool. I'm guessing that's Krool. And this text is typed out on the screen. Well done, ninja. Mental block has been vanquished and the nth dimension can live in peace once more. You are truly a warrior of the highest rank. Take a well-earned rest, but be careful. Krool is all-powerful. I fear we will need to call on your services again someday. You then get the credits. These are the Gremlin Interactive credits first, then Jaguar credits, then Atari credits. After all this, you see the text "The End" in the same extruded tubular font used in the paused graphic, which I haven't actually described yet. You hit a button, and then you can enter your name on the high score table. After this, you get a cool animation where Zool walks up against a black background, jumps up and spins around 3 times, ending with a roundhouse kick, freezes in place with his foot facing you. You can see the word Zool on the bottom of his shoe, and he wiggles his eyebrows at you. You get the same sequence whether you finish as Zool or Zooz, but it's still pretty cool and unexpected.
End of spoilers. The remainder of this episode is spoiler-free, courtesy of Chupa Chups, the world's best-selling lollipop.
No, it's really not. On the Amiga, Zool 2 is controlled with a single-button joystick, much like the first Zool. That single button shoots if you're on the ground, and performs a spin attack if you're in the air. If you have the Super Shot power-up, holding down the button will wind up the larger firepower released to fire. When clinging to a column, you can hit the button and then left or right to swap to the other side, and if you hold the button down and run into a wall, you'll backflip. Sticking with the Amiga control scheme, pushing up will jump, up at an angle will jump at an angle. You can also push up to climb when you're attached to a wall or some other vertical surface, likewise down. This is something that the original Zool game lacked. You couldn't climb, but rather had to hop off and reattach, which is kind of annoying. When not climbing, pushing down will crouch, which is good for shooting some of the smaller enemies or some of the snowflakes on Mount Ices. Smart bombs on the Amiga are triggered with the spacebar. You can slide to the left or right by pushing down at a diagonal, and the slide only lasts for about a quarter of the screen, but it's an offensive move which isn't too bad at taking out ground-based enemies. I didn't know about this move until late in the research cycle for this episode. It's not something I ever used before, and I've read about a dozen reviews of the game without seeing it mentioned as a potential attack. If it's mentioned at all, it's just in a description of the control scheme. It's not a great move against the chicks in Swan Lake since they require a second hit, but for the other bottom-dwelling enemies, it's not too bad. I mentioned the Amiga control scheme because of how it translated to the Jaguar controller. On the Jaguar, the B button is that multi-purpose shooting, spinning, back-flipping, column-crawling button. The Jaguar C button is like the Amiga spacebar, firing off the smart bomb if you have one. And the A button on the Jaguar is just like pushing up on the Amiga joystick. It'll jump, and it'll climb if you're clinging to a vertical surface. Since the Jaguar D-pad works just like the Amiga joystick as well, that means there are 2 ways to jump, pushing up and pushing the A button. The Option button will enter the Options menu, which can only be done from the title screen. The Pause button can pause the game and works pretty much everywhere. If the Jaguar is on with Zool 2 in it, you can pause this game. It might not make much sense for you to pause the title screen or the character select screen or the stage screen, but you can. You have that power. When you hit the pause button, you see the word paused appear in a bright red tubular extruded font. In a lovely bit of consistency with other Jaguar games, you can hide this text by simultaneously hitting 1 and 3 on the Jaguar keypad. And you can also adjust the sound volumes while paused, music and sound effects, by hitting A or B respectively, and then pushing left or right on the D-pad. The 0 button on the keypad will mute or unmute the music, and hitting star and pound together will reset the Jaguar. Holding down star, option, and pound from the options screen will reset the cartridge memory to defaults. When you first boot up Zool 2 on the Jaguar, you get an animation, a rendered animation which starts off looking at the back of Zool's head. He turns around to face you, pulls his left hand up, which is pointing in your direction, and then looks down with surprise as some letters lift up, the letters Z and L with an underline. These letters frame his head, and as he resumes his angry, no-nonsense expression, you see that his eyes form 2-letter O's, and you've spelled his name. The frame rate of this animation isn't great, but it's perfectly in time to the opening sound of the theme song. The music kicks in with a barrage of strange noises as the animation completes, and then you get a few vanity screens fading in and out. First, you see the Gremlin logo, the older one before switching to Gremlin Interactive. The game itself uses the old logo and naming, and the box uses the new name and logo. Gremlin presents, and the next screen is the Imagitech Design logo, an Imagitech Design production. And then a blue screen showing Zool leaning against the Chupa Chups label. It says, "In association with Chupa Chups, the world's best-selling lollipops." After the unexpected advertisement, another blue screen. The Zool eyes are in the center, while the letters Z and L slide up from the bottom and carry the eyes, forming O's to the top of the screen, somewhat mimicking that animation in the beginning. The number 2 in a large red and orange font is drawn to the right, and this is the main menu. These vanity screens last between 3 and 4.5 seconds each, or you could skip each one individually by hitting A, B, or C. You cannot skip the animation in the beginning. The title screen after the 2 is drawn shows text which alternates between press fire to start game and press option for options. Below this is the text licensed to Atari Corporation and then copyright 1994 Gremlin Graphics Software Limited. If you set the controller down now and back away, you'll see some gameplay footage after 8 seconds. There are 3 gameplay sequences, each lasting a little over 18 seconds if you include the level intro screen. The footage includes Zool in Swan Lake, Zooz in Swan Lake, and then Zool in Bulberry Hill. The attract sequence cycles between the opening animation, which lasts for about 10 seconds, and the high score table, and that's shown for 6 seconds, while the text at the bottom switches between press fire to start game and press option for options a few times. The high score table is initially populated with names like Call, Joyce M, JP Tastic, Hi-Fi Man, Chris, Sweeg Gems, The Beast, and Turbo up top. The initial scores range from 3,000 to 9,000, except for Turbo with 101,115. Something to shoot for. After the high score table, it's back to the title screen and then the gameplay footage. The loop continues like this. Let's take a look at the options. It's always nice to know what your options are. The options menu has a different background, which is frankly kind of ugly. It's basically the same image as the box art, but from a wider angle. But that's not what makes it ugly. No, it's the colors, or rather lack of color. The scene looks to be rendered in 16 colors, 4-bit color depth. It's distorted too, like stretched to a different aspect ratio. Living up to its name though, the options menu does contain several game options, which you can select with a yellow arrowhead by moving the D-pad up or down, and cycle between the available values with one of the face buttons. First is inertia, that's right, in the nth dimension you can toggle Newtonian physics. Default is on, but if you wanted to stop on a dime and always stick the landing, you can switch that to off. The difficulty level is next, easy, normal, or hard, and I discussed these before in the context of the number of tokens required to complete each level. But the initial number of lives differs too. For easy, you start off with 8 lives. Not quite up to the Bubsy level, but still fairly generous. On normal, you get 6 lives, and on hard, that's 4 lives to start. You can choose the number of players, and there are 3 options here. 1, 2 1-pad, that's 2 players with 1 controller, and 2 2-pads, that's where you need to dress up your controller in a frilly little ballet skirt before playing.
That was terrible.
Yeah, that was pretty bad, sorry. 2 players, 2 controllers, that's what it means. With either of the 2-player modes, play alternates. When one player dies, it's the next player's turn, and so forth. There's a configure option in the menu, and that lets you change up the buttons on the controller. This is a separate menu with the same color-deprived background, and you can toggle between the different button combinations for fire, jump, and smart bomb. You can return to the options screen from here, or simply start the game. From the options menu, a start option at the bottom will start the game. There's no way to return to the title screen without resetting the Jaguar, but there's not really anything you can do there that you can't do from the options screen. Well, except for entering the attract mode and seeing the high scores. But if you do reset the Jaguar or turn it off, rest assured that your options will be saved, as will the high scores to cartridge memory. When you actually start the game, you get to choose your character, Zool or Zooz. Both characters are shown on the screen, Zool with his hands on his hips, Zooz with her arms crossed. Behind them is a large circle, white if selected, gray if not, and you use the D-pad left or right to choose your favorite nth dimension ninja. Remember, in some levels they can take different paths at times. The text will say, Player 1 choose at the top, and if there's a second player, Player 2 choose for them. Both players can choose the same character, that's fine. Once the player selections are done, you see the level screen. This shows you the current world, level, and player, as in Bulberry Hills, Stage 1, Player 2. The background of the screen is red, fading a bit darker at the top and bottom, and dominated by a large Chupa Chups logo in yellow. Off to the left you have Zool, or Zooz depending on the player's selection, leaning up against a white wall in a spotlight. On the right there are 3 circles arranged vertically, each with the word bonus underneath it. These are the bonus tokens collected thus far, the Zoon tokens. You hit a button to start the level. Inside the level, there are numbers and indicators all around the screen. In the top left are the numbers SC and then your current score. Top center shows your life meter represented as 5 wide shaded dashes. They kind of look like Hot Tamales cinnamon candy, but longer, and definitely not Hot Tamales, because those are made by the Just Born company, and you can't have 2 competing confectionaries in one game. As I said, there are 5 to start, and you can have 0 and still be alive, but 1 more hit and you're back to the checkpoint, or beginning of the level. You may notice these health points flickering a bit. On closer inspection, these flicker slightly every second, and if you turn off the music and sit in a quiet part of the level, you'll hear a faint pulsing sound. But sometimes it doesn't do this at all, no flicker, no pulsing. I couldn't find any consistent pattern to when this happens. And while I did not notice the pulsing sound back when this game came out, I did notice the flicker, which bothered me because there should be no flicker in Jaguar games. But whether this is an intentional design or some sort of weird glitch, it's there, usually, so I'll move on. In the top right corner is a number prefixed with the word high, H-I. This is not a greeting, but the highest score recorded on the cartridge. By default, this is 101,115. In the bottom left corner is the item completed percentage, which goes from 0 to 99. Next to that is an arrow, which points to the end of the level with a granularity of 8 different directions. In the bottom center of the screen is the remaining time, in seconds, starting at 300. The counter is prefixed with a yellow letter T. All these text-based indicators around the screen are white, the T is the only thing that isn't. In the bottom right corner are the letters LI, followed by a number. This is your remaining number of lives, and if you play well and grab 1-ups, you can reach double digits. If you happen to have 99 and then collect another 1-up, this will read 0, but will go back to 99 once you die. You won't get 99 unless you're cheating, though. When your LI counter reads 0, you're on your last life, and when that's gone, it's game over. You see a red screen with 2 plain yellow mental block images on either side, a mirror image, and the text game over in the middle with the simple drop shadow. If your score is sufficient to land you on the high score table, you'll see that next. It's the same background as the options screen, and you can choose A to Z along the bottom, along with a space, hyphen, exclamation point, question mark, delete, and end. You've got 10 spaces to work with here. The gameplay screen itself is 2-dimensional with a couple degrees of parallax. It's very colorful, I'd say 16-bit high color, 65,000 and change. Many of the graphics were enhanced by Colin Jackson and James Hartshorn of Imagitech Design. I think they were both with Imagitech. James seemed to be more freelance. But you'll find these enhancements, especially in the background images, such that they look different, better, I would say, than the Amiga versions. These enhanced graphics ended up in the DOS version of Zool 2, albeit with fewer colors and a few additional changes. The sprites are well animated, with a generous number of animation frames each. Zool and Zooz in particular look great, but they move so quickly that you might not have time to appreciate their smooth animation. Every time you defeat an enemy, there's a brief small explosion graphic, a shower of 4 colored spheres, and sometimes several tokens flying out. With several enemies on the screen, all shot within close proximity, that's a lot of flying objects, and the game often handles this without slowing down, but if you've got 2 Zool or spinning invincibility lines and run through blasting everything, you'll see some slowdown, definitely. Also, blowing away a line of fake walls with the Super Shot power-up, that'll slow it down nicely. I couldn't determine which software programs were used to generate the opening animation, but when I first turned on the game in 1995, I thought it looked a whole lot like an Autodesk animation. I had seen similar animations on a computer done with Autodesk Animator or Animator Pro. These were popular 2D animation programs for DOS in the early 90s. There must have been a ray trace program involved too, but I'll talk a little bit more about this in storytime. The sounds are cartoony and have enough separate channels available that I never found any contention between sounds. Before researching this podcast, I never noticed that there was a sound while running, and barely registered the skidding sound when you stopped running. In addition to this, and the shooting and spinning and crashing, you also have environmental sounds like chili birds chirping or electricity buzzing. So the sounds are good, but the music is the real treat here. Zool 2's music is done with 4-channel Pro Tracker modules, composed for Gremlin graphics by Patrick Phelan. The tracks seem to be identical to the Amiga versions of the game, and most of them are available on the Fading Twilight music archive. Taking a look at these files, the internal song names roughly match the level names. There's Swan, Bulb, Zool Egyptian, Snake, and Ices. The title track has a whopping 22 instruments, but none of them are named. The other mod files, the instruments are fewer, between 11 and 15, and these do have instrument names specified in the metadata. Some of the more amusing ones include Scary Electric, Egyptian Plucker, Egyptian Horny Thing, Bambua, Wibble, and Ice Cream. The songs are relatively long. Many of the games I've covered so far have songs which loop around the minute mark. These go on for 3 to 3.5 minutes. The title track is 3 minutes 21 seconds. The longest level is Mount Ices at 3:27, and the shortest is Mental Blockage at 2:25. Speaking of mental blockage, that track is not actually in the Fading Twilight archive. I really like the music here in Zool 2. My favorite, I would say, is Swan Lake. Maybe because that's where I've spent the most of my time in this game, or maybe because it's just a great tune. And that brings me to the cheat codes. Oh, sweet, glorious cheat codes. What would I do without you? Check out episode 15, Dragging the Bruce Lee Story, for the answer there. All the cheat codes are entered on the options screen using a 5-digit number on the keypad and require a level of precision. I've been able to mess up the code entry so badly that I had to power cycle the Jaguar console before I could try again. Successful entry of any of these codes will give you a rooster sound. You can chain multiple codes together, and they'll take effect once you choose Start from the Options menu. I'll start off with the level codes. These are Bulberry Hill 77749, Tooting Common 88563, Snaking Pass 33666, Mount Ices 11968, Mental Blockage 91266. As I mentioned in the Bubsy episode, if you're unable to get past a level, it's nice to be able to skip ahead and enjoy more of what the game has to offer. Unlike Bubsy, though, the codes in Zool 2 will only take you to the first level of that world. So if you're stuck on the first Mount Ices level, you're not going to be able to skip ahead to the second. If you wanted to jump right into a bonus round, enter 31867. It's like starting a level, but with a bonus round screen instead. I only got this to work once for some reason. Even going back to the game a week later, I couldn't get it to work again, so your mileage may vary. There are some other codes too. 31965 will start you off with 99 lives. If that's not enough, try 11275 for unlimited health. Mostly unlimited. Spiky walls can still hurt you, even kill you if you don't learn your lesson the first few times, and you're always susceptible to the unyielding passage of time. There are a few bugs I'd like to mention. These are ones that I came across while researching this episode, and not something I found online or came across back when the game came out. First, I mentioned graphic shading glitches here and there, mostly in the bird spike bowls in Swan Lake. Very minor. A more noticeable glitch is how sometimes tokens get stuck where you can't reach them, just embedded in a wall or floor. If you pause the game, hit A or B to adjust the volume level, and then reset the Jaguar with star and pound, those volume adjustment graphics will remain on the screen until you repause and then unpause. The second and third smart bombs blink at such a crazy rate that it can't be intentional. I don't see that in other ports of the game. Finally, if you are invincible and playing Snaking past level 2, when the Snake Taxi exits stage right, there are 2 mines at the entrance to the passage, and those are supposed to keep you out. But if you are invincible, those mines won't bother you, and you can just ride the snake until the right edge of the level. The snake will lose its head and tail, and you'll fall down inside a wall. You can walk inside the wall all around a large secret area, but the clipping around the secret area keeps you stuck within the wall. I was able to get out of this predicament once, but mostly I would run out of time trying. Zool 2 came conveniently packaged in a box, and the front of this box contained some box art. The Zool logo is at the top, not quite centered, predominantly red, with Zool's red masked yellow eyes making up the O's. There's a fiery 2 next to the word Zool, and this 2 is made up from Zooz's whip. Zool and Zooz are below, her running, him striking a fierce nth dimension ninja pose. In the background is, I think, mental block, all eyes and eyebrows and block, and spewing out from where his nostrils would be, if he had a nose, are wide beams of light. You've got some stars and nebulae in the distant background. On the left of the box is the Atari logo, made in the USA, and the ESRB rating, K to A, kids to adults, ages 6+. On the right is the icon indicating 1 or 2 players. The screenshot in the bottom left corner is from the mental blockage level. You've got that phrenology bust dominating the screen and a cluster of tokens. Not a terribly compelling or colorful choice for a front-of-the-box screenshot. But if you're curious enough at the store to pick up the box and look at the back, you would see 4 more screenshots, including skidding atop a die in Snaking Pass, grabbing some tokens in Mount Isis, running toward a couple of chili birds in Swan Lake, and suspended in mid-air in Tooting Common. The 4 screenshots alternate between featuring Zool and Zooz. The game description on the box is in 3 languages, English, French, and German, and they all say more or less the same thing. It's Krool and Unusual Punishment. That's spelled Krool, of course. Zool and his daring and lovely sidekick Zooz face a challenge that would wilt the knees of even the toughest ninja. The nth dimension is under attack from the evil forces of Krool. Our heroes must restore the nth dimension to equilibrium and exile Mental Block and his mind-numbing cronies before imagination is wiped out of existence. Zoon, the 2-headed intergalactic wonder canine, will help, but you'll need skills from the nth dimension to save imagination. Only the English translation has an exclamation point at the end. We're much more excitable, we English speakers. The new Gremlin Interactive logo is at the bottom, and the fine print in the corner says that this software is authorized by Atari for use with the Jaguar 64-bit interactive multimedia system. So if you had a cartridge and wondered if you could play it, it's okay, it's authorized. The cartridge itself features a cropped version of the artwork from the top of Zooz's head on up. The manual is a monochrome booklet weighing it at 18 pages if you include the covers, which I like to do because Atari Age includes the covers, and that way I can just look at their page count and call it good. The manual contains the story, controls, options, several large drawings of the characters, and power-ups that take up 2 full pages. There are some hints in a final briefing that includes things like the 99% object goal, false walls, and bouncing platforms. There are some level-specific hints like the light tubes and snowflakes. And there's another hint which reads, when you're seemingly on a path to nowhere, flashes may provide you with inspiration, or at least a target. Mental Block may be able to make some objects invisible, but is not 100% accurate. I think this is a long way of referring to the platforms in Tooting Common, which appear when you shoot them. Zool 2 is included in the pages of the official Jaguar Gamer's Guide, wherein they discuss some basic strategies and provide walkthroughs for each level, showing how to find the secret areas. This is how I was able to find the math behind the token percentages, credit where it's due, and there was another tip that I found pretty helpful. In the later levels, use up to jump. That way you can just spam the fire button to jump and spin, and hit C when you need to kick off the smart bomb. Hopping around like this with the spin attack keeps you safer, for example among the streams of parachuting Hitler cookies on Mount Isis. The Gamer's Guide also contains the layout of the final level, Mental Blockage, using stitched-together screenshots and with a detailed walkthrough. I sure am glad I bought this book. It's been very helpful. No commercials or print ads exist for the Jaguar version of Zool 2, not that I was able to find, so I uploaded an Amiga CD32 ad to Facebook, and I'll include that in the show notes as well. Reviews of Zool 2 on the Jaguar are generally favorable, but I'm going to start with a preview of the game from the January 1995 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly, just briefly. For previews, EGM at the time listed the good, the bad, and the ugly of each game. For Zool 2, the good was that the characters in this game are really cute and have some pretty funny animations. The bad is that the game is completely frustrating and never seems to get any easier even with some practice. And the ugly is, the layers of dust this game will probably create could make anybody's allergies flare. I don't get that last one. Are they saying that you'll be spending so much time trying to get better at this game that you'll neglect household cleaning? Or that you'll get so frustrated playing Zool 2 that the game will sit and collect dust forevermore? Probably the second one. Let's flip ahead to the actual review in the following month. It's just a single paragraph review and has 5 editors rating the game on a scale of 1 to 10. The scores are 3 7s and 2 6s, and this is what they said. This is a pretty good version of the pint-sized ninja character, enhanced by the addition of the playable female character. As usual, the levels are huge, but at times are visual overkill. Not a bad game, though. To EGM's credit, they have some general hints later in this issue, in the Tricks of the Trade section, which I will read off in bullet point format. Watch the clock. If you found enough items to finish the level and your time is running out, don't worry about picking up more. Head for the end of the level. Shoot at walls to expose hidden areas. Don't waste your smart bombs on just a couple of enemies. Wait until there are many on the screen and take them all out at once. Keep the fire button pressed while jumping to use the spin attack and avoid taking damage. Experiment with the inertia option. You may find one way easier than the other. The fine print promises more Zool 2 hints in the next issue of EGM, but I looked at that, issue 68, and found no trace of Zool 2, except in the list of game sales from US retailer Babbage's, where they have Zool 2 coming in at number 6 between Iron Soldier and Tempest 2000, 2 games which had been out for a while but were apparently still selling well, relatively speaking. Moving on to GamePro, I'm going to start with a review of Zool 1 for the Genesis in their March 1994 issue. I'm not trying to call them out for any shenanigans or anything, I just like to have a baseline. Just briefly, on a scale of 1 to 5, they rate Zool 1's graphics 4.0, sound 4.0, control 4.5, and fun factor 4.5, saying that although the kart's graphics and sounds are not as refined as Sonic's, the speedy ninja's got style as he accelerates through levels and jams past obstacles in fierce fighting action. Okay, on to Zool 2. This is from the February 1995 issue. Same rating scale. They gave graphics 4.5, sound 4.5, control 4.0, and fun factor 4.5. The summary reads, fast and colorful graphics make this game the best hop and bopper on the Jaguar. Digging into the review, writer Captain Squidio says that Zool 2 is just as entertaining as a frantic shopping spree in Candyland. He says that the game's speed will probably throw off your control for a while, that the sharp graphics resemble a vivid Disney dream, but the hero himself doesn't display some personality or humor. There are enough wacky sound effects to fill every Three Stooges movie ever made, but he laments the lack of character voices. I guess except for this one. He says that the game is cheerful and attractive but not easy, with no way to save your progress, but you have plenty of reasons to stick with it. Let's take a look at some pro tips. Zool's Spin is a devastatingly effective defensive weapon that makes you invulnerable to most enemies. In Stage 2 of Swan Lake, jump off the last pillar to the right, slide down the cliff to the bonus, and then blast the wall at the bottom to find a secret 1-up. I guess this tip doesn't do much without the accompanying picture. At the options screen, set your inertia to off to keep Zool from sliding when he builds up momentum. Don't linger on these beaded Swan Lake bridges or they'll give way. Again, it helps to have the picture. Check out the show notes. The review will be in the show notes. And finally, shoot at walls to reveal secret rooms. All the screenshots here are from Swan Lake. I guess the publication wasn't given level codes for its review. Let's see, what else do I have? Video games and computer entertainment, 6 out of 10, saying that despite the fact that Zool 2 can be fun to play for a while, I couldn't help but wonder why something more original wasn't released as one of the Jaguar's first platform games. Die Hard Game Fan, for the 3 reviewers, rated out of 100, 88, 75, and 80. The quick summary that I have reads, I didn't like Zool very much when I first played it on the Amiga. The character was likable, but the overly cute backgrounds had me clamoring for the off button. Zool 2 on the Jaguar is much improved. Visually, Zool 2 looks rich and the audio is superb for a cart. If only the frustration factor was lower, this would be an incredible title. And finally, Game Informer was the least enamored with this title, giving the game 5 out of 10. In electronic media, Atari Explorer Online contained 2 reviews of Zool 2 in the mid-January 1995 issue. The first review is from UK gamer Zooz, and he says that the graphics had been improved over the computer version, that the music is consistently excellent and makes the game acceptable rather than mediocre. It's a normal run-and-jump affair, but very difficult later on, and the graphics are too much, the colors specifically, for the eyes to keep track of everything. Overall score, 75%. Great sounds, mediocre gameplay, and basically just not good enough. Tim Steed penned a review, which goes into more detail, outlining the interface controls, objectives, and power-ups. He said that the backgrounds were very dull, but things in the foreground are clear and colorful. He said that the game is fast, Sonic seems slow as molasses in comparison. Control is excellent, music is good, but not earth-shattering. He said that it's one of the most challenging platformers he's ever played, and it'll hold people over until Rayman. For scores, on a scale of 1 to 5, Control 4.5, Gameplay 3.0, Graphics 3.0, Sound 3.0, and Overall 3.5. That works out to 7 out of 10, which stayed consistent throughout the run of Atari Explorer Online and Jaguar Explorer Online. Often I've seen these scores fade with time, so having this one consistent kinda stands out. Moby Games, in a mixture of modern and contemporary reviews, the highest rating is 91% and the lowest 60%, for an average of 72% across the 13 listed reviews. On Atari Age, there are 5 external reviews listed, with a high of 95% and a low of 70% for an average of 82%. I'd like to point out one more review, and that would be from the No Swear Gamer. Phil, you may know, recently wrapped up the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast in style, and he covered Zool 2 on his YouTube channel a couple years ago, so I thought I would mention it here. Of the 32 games he had reviewed at this time, he ranked at number 13, between Jackal on the NES and Blackthorn on the 32X. Rarity-wise, Zool 2 is listed as 3 out of 10 on Atari Age. The game is not hard to find, it's also not expensive. On eBay, I see the game selling for between $13 and $20 loose, complete for between $20 and $30, and sealed for around $40. Bravo Sierra Computers, $40 complete, Video 61 new for $50, BNC Computer Visions, new for $30, Best Electronics, new for $40 or loose for $30. High scores. Zool 2 was part of the Atari Age High Score Club at least 2 separate times, once on the normal skill level and the other on easy. On normal, Austin got the high score with 279,385 points, set in February 2012. He also recorded this run and uploaded it with commentary to YouTube, and I'll include a link to that in the show notes. For the easy skill level, Jeremiah JT holds that one with 257,250 points, set April 2011. As for my score, it's the strangest thing. I hadn't played this game in many, many years, and when I plopped in my cartridge to start research for this episode, it didn't have any high scores. I had to have cracked the high score table back then. It's a pretty low barrier of entry. But all the listed scores were the defaults. Of course, I did play this game a lot for research purposes, but none of those times were just to play. There was always some ulterior motive, capture this sound, or time this certain event, or whatever. Many of those involved cheat codes, but the cartridge did save all those scores just fine. So I figured I would actually play the game, give it an honest go on the normal difficulty. I only mustered 71,455 points, getting to Bulberry Hill Stage 3, but that's actually my best run ever. Even going back to 1995, that's the farthest I've ever gotten. Zool 2 was first released on the Amiga, A500 or 600, and then the A1200 AGA. The A500 and 600 was at ECS. This version lacked any sort of background, it just had a color gradient that seemed to move with the foreground, so no separate layers. The AGA version, Amiga 1200, was released later and had more colors as well as a separate background layer with some parallax between the two. This was done at the expense of speed, though. It got pretty choppy, apparently, and was overall slower than the older ECS version. Or is that OCS? I don't know my Amigas, I'm afraid. I'm more of an Atari ST guy myself, though I don't currently own one, haven't for years. But I do listen to Wade's Atari 1632 podcast, if that helps with my ST cred. A little? Very little?
No.
The level intro screen is different on the Amiga, both versions. Zool or Zooz will tap a hand or foot impatiently, and there's a separate little song that plays. You don't have the same track flow through these screens like you do on the Jaguar. The CD32 release had a longer animated intro, as was usually the case with CD-ROM games of the era, and has the added bonus of a whole other world, paper planes, a land of office supplies. The CD32 does not have the same music as the Amiga or Jaguar versions. It runs in 256 colors, and like the AGA and Jaguar versions, includes a background layer with some parallax. There was a conversion to the PC. The DOS version seems to be based off of the Jaguar with similar enhanced graphics, though noticeably fewer colors. I tried out the DOS version briefly, and a few things surprised me. First, I couldn't get the sound effects and music at the same time. The menu choices let me have one or the other, but not both. That might have been the case with the original Amiga version as well, but I'm not sure. The music was very similar to the Jaguar, but the quality seemed a bit lower, like a lower sampling rate. The backgrounds were more Jaguar than Amiga, at least in Swan Lake. They had a horizontal black region through the center. I didn't try very hard to get my gamepad working in DOS, so I just played with a keyboard, which is by default mapped to the number pad with up or 8 to jump and enter to fire. Not owning an Amiga computer or CD32 console, I didn't try out those other ports, but I would venture to say that with the enhanced graphics and simultaneous music and sound effects and more versatile controls, the Jaguar port is the best of the bunch. However, there's another consideration here, or at least there was, back in the tail end of 1994, and that's the price tag. The Lost Dragon on Atari.io did some pricing research for me, and in the UK you could get Zool 2 for the Amiga for about £26, or the CD32 for £30. The Jaguar cartridge, £54 sterling. Were the extra colors worth nearly twice the price? I don't know. But I do know that my thoughts and opinions of the game, and yours, are coming up right after the break. I got the impression that platform games were kind of going out of style around the time Zool 2 came out on the Jaguar, but I wasn't ready to give up on that genre. Focusing mostly on Atari systems as I did back then, I didn't play a lot of 2D platformers, but I wanted to. There were a few on the links that I really liked, but though I had a Super Nintendo at the time, the one platform title I owned was a big letdown, Spider-Man and the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge. So I was of course interested in a new platform game on the Jaguar, and Zool 2 looked like fun. Initial impressions were not great. The animation at the beginning was slow and unimpressive. I had had my fill of Autodesk animations for reasons I'll discuss in the storytime segment at the end of the episode, and the Zool 2 animation didn't really look any better than those. When the music kicked in with the wild sound effects, I did not see that coming, or rather, hear that coming. That was a surprise and not necessarily a good one. But once I let the music play to get into its own thing, I liked it. Zool 2, it seemed, had a sense of humor. It looked serious on the box, everyone's brows furrowed, but I liked the cartoony look and feel and sound. The Swan Lake background music is what won me over. Much like the first world of Bubsy and Fractured Furry Tales, it's the opening level music that hooked me. I guess it goes to show how important music can be in a video game in making that first impression. Sorry, Trevor McFur. I played the game, but didn't get very far. When my friends came over, I would show them this game, which was faster than Sonic, and then to prove it, I would wait in the attract mode for the quick Bulberry Hill demo because I wasn't getting there on my own. I've got to talk briefly about the Chupa Chups sponsorship. At the time I bought this game, I had never heard of Chupa Chups. I'm sure it was a commonplace thing in Europe at this time, but here in the States, at least in my little corner of America, we had Dum Dum Pops, we had Tootsie Pops, and that's about it. Zotz Pops in high school, that was a thing. And that reminds me of another story, but I'm going to push that back to story time as well. I've been a fan of the Looney Tunes character Marvin the Martian ever since watching Bugs Bunny as a kid, and around 1995 I got this silly little lollipop holder in my Christmas stocking. It had Marvin the Martian holding his disintegrator pistol, and with a lollipop sticking out of the top of his head. You hold down a button, Marvin waves his gun up and down, and the lollipop spins. It's a dumb little gimmicky thing, first world problems, you need a machine to work the lollipop for you. But the lollipop that came with this totally unnecessary little gadget was Chupa Chups brand, root beer flavored, I believe. Wow, this was the thing that was in Zool 2, same logo and everything. Never unwrapped that lollipop, but I thought it was pretty cool to have that tie-in. So you could say that to me the advertisement was more of a feature than an annoyance, and I wouldn't be surprised if I was alone in that regard. I started show prep for this episode around Halloween, and for the past several years I've tried to carve a retro gaming design into my jack-o'-lantern. If you're not familiar with jack-o'-lanterns, I realize Halloween isn't nearly as big in other countries as it is in the US. We take a pumpkin, a large orange gourd, scrape out all the guts, carve a face or some other pattern into the skin, and stick a candle inside in the middle. It's a perfectly rational thing to do. In past years, I did scenes from Haunted House and Adventure on the Atari 2600, a Pac-Man Ghost and Space Invader from the arcade games, and this year I thought about doing the E.T. character sprite from the Atari 2600 game, but since I was working on the Zool episode, I thought maybe I would do the eyes from the logo instead. My wife suggested that most people wouldn't get the E.T. reference, but with Zool, even if you didn't get the reference, it's still a cool-looking set of eyes, so I went with a Zool pattern. The mask around the eyes was carved to a thin depth, with the eyebrows and pupils not carved out at all, and the yellows of the eyes were completely carved out. It looked okay in full light, but in the dark with the candle going inside, it looked really cool. I'm very happy with how that turned out. Okay, so rating time. I use the No Swear Gamer scale on this show. It's called that because it's the scale used by Phil, the No Swear Gamer on YouTube, and former host, as I said before, of the recently completed Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast. The scale uses 4 categories, not using stars or grade letters or some other abstraction, but simple English terms which don't need a whole lot of explanation. These categories are Hall of Fame, Solid, Meh, and Trash. The one part that needs explanation is that you can only fit 5 titles into the Hall of Fame or the Trash. So here's what I like about Zool 2. Gotta start with the music. The music gets you hooked and keeps you playing, and it does its job very well. I like how it continues through the intro screens between levels. Gives it a nice consistent flow. The animation is good, as I said before. It's far too fast to see all the detail, but the little things, like how Zool and Zooz's head moves back and forth as they run, gives it more of a 3-dimensional appearance. And this was true for the other platforms as well, even Zool 1, but it's still nice. I found the enemies to be inventive and interesting. They all have different behaviors, so they aren't simple sprite swaps from one world to the next, which ups the variety factor. I think the token collecting concept is pretty good. It makes you really explore each level. I like how you don't get kicked back when you're hurt. That's been a major annoyance in other platform games. You take the hit, you flicker for a bit, but your avatar is still right where you left it. I like the persistent world. You don't have to start from scratch if you die, recollect tokens and so forth. You get to keep what you've earned. And finally, cheat codes. Oh, glorious cheat codes for making my job here easier. As with Bubsy and Fractured Fairy Tales, having level codes gets me much more enjoyment out of a difficult game. The satisfaction of conquering a brutal level, perhaps not so much, but each of the Zool 2 levels are so different that I like having the option to visit them all. You don't have the same granularity as with Bubsy. You only have codes for each world, not each individual level, but that's where the invincibility comes in. Believe it or not, the game still does present some challenge if you're invincible. You still have the countdown timer, you still have some tricky platforming, you still have the painful walls, but the levels are usually more than a point A to point B affair. There are some puzzle elements involved, so you're going to find more of a challenge than, for example, playing Doom or Wolfenstein in God mode, which is the closest comparison I can think of off the top of my head. Now for my dislikes, things that bothered or annoyed me while playing Zool 2. The endlessly respawning enemies. I hate respawning enemies. They pop back in the instant their patrol area, if you will, is no longer on screen. There is one advantage, though. Twice, while playing the third Mulberry Hill level, I didn't quite have enough tokens to activate the boss, and the respawning enemies were enough to fill that gap. I don't get the flickering health bar and that slight thumping sound every second. At first I thought it was accidental flicker. Flicker in a Jaguar game? What is this, 1985? Careful playtesting of the game and researching this episode makes me think that it's probably not a graphical limitation, but I still don't get it, and I don't like it. The slowdown can be annoying at times. It's not choppy, it stays smooth, just slower, which makes it more dramatic, I suppose, but I like my game engines to move at a consistent clip. Well, it'd be nice. The difficulty is high. Even on easy, where you don't have to collect as many tokens, you still have the same number of enemies, and they're relentless. There are ones like the Swan Lake Ostrich that repeatedly spew projectiles, and I've only had about a 25% success rate in killing them with smart bombs. So, in addition to the tricky platforming and the puzzle elements, you've got this non-stop onslaught of relentless enemies. It is not an easy game, no doubt about it. Avoiding damage by constantly hopping and spinning, I don't know, that's not how I like to play games. Like first-person shooters, deathmatch, constantly hopping around may give you an advantage, but I don't like it. I like to be more measured, even if that means I lose, which I probably will. The high ground. It might guarantee a victory in a lightsaber battle, but in Zool 2, it'll almost guarantee that you'll take a hit from an enemy climbing up a gentle hill toward you, since your shots will fly right over. Maybe this would be a good use for the slide attack, but I couldn't work that in very well personally. It would have been nice to have the level codes as an official feature. I probably would have played this much more back in the 90s if I could unlock, so to speak, whichever level I was able to reach, starting at Mulberry Hill, for example. Weighing the pros and cons, I am going to give Zool 2 a rating of solid. It's challenging and even a little bit unfair, but in my opinion, everything about this game is solid, except for those flickering health gauges. That's my opinion, though. What do you think? On Facebook, I posted a picture of my Zool 2 jack-o'-lantern and asked for feedback on the game. I didn't get any feedback. Randall said of the jack-o'-lantern that it's too bad nobody will get the reference, and he's probably right. I posted another call out for feedback, this time posting an ad for the Amiga CD32 version of Zool 2, and heard back from Bjorn, who said, "It's a classic on the Amiga, and it's still a solid game on the Jaguar. A little bit hard to beat, and the steering could be a little bit more precise, but gameplay-wise, way better than Bubsy. Fun to play, that's what counts." Thank you, Bjorn. Dr. Clu posted a picture of his Zool 2 collection and promised feedback on Atari Age, but he gave the game a rating of solid. Philip the Whovian posted here and said, "Hey Shinto, just about to finish listening through all the back episodes until the latest one is released. The podcast is amazing. Please keep up the good work. Will you cover games released after the Jaguar was discontinued?" So yes, Philip, my episode guide lists all the official Atari releases and the Telegames titles, followed by the Songbird releases and Battlesphere. The homebrew titles, of which there are many, I have to get a hold of them first. Ones like Gorf Classic and Mad Bodies, those would be more difficult. Public domain releases I could easily cover, of course. And I might have to buy Rebooteroids. I love the way that game looks. So we'll see. That's a ways off, but I'm looking forward to getting there. On the Atari Age forum, Dr. Clu posted a nicely formatted review of the game, good detail and even embedded images, but I'm not going to read that. I'm not going to read it because I got a heads up that Dr. Clu sent in an audio submission for this game, so I think I will defer to that. I think that's all the forums with feedback for Zool 2. I have a complete list of forums with a thread for this podcast in the show notes. There are several of them, so I apologize if I missed anything. Bishop, do we have any text or audio submissions for Zool 2?
We do. 1 text and 3 audio submissions. But apparently you already knew about one of those.
That's right. Thank you, Bishop. Please load those up.
Ready.
Our text submission is from The Lost Dragon. He says, "I must confess I might just be a tad biased here, as I have never been a fan of games on the ST Amiga that have attempted to capture what the consoles were doing. Robocod, Viking Child, a slow Wonder Boy clone. Leander, aka Galahad on Genesis. And when Zool arrived, it seemed as if Gremlin were trying to cash in on the fact US Gold had failed his promise to secure a home computer conversion of Sonic the Hedgehog, let alone product placement in games. The UK press seemed to go ape over the original Zool, so whilst technically superb on even the lowly Atari ST, just never had an ounce of personality that Sonic had, so I was very surprised to see it get a sequel. To myself, this seemed to be Atari simply clapping its hands. It had acquired a license that Commodore had, having lost out on an ST Falcon version of Zool 2, and having a cartridge-based exclusive, as no SNES Genesis versions, etc. of Zool 2. Whilst Jaguar Zool 2 might be pretty nifty colors and resolution-wise compared to other versions, it cannot disguise its roots. It's another port by Jaguar port specialists, Magitech Design, and trying to give non-Sega owning format owners a Sonic-esque title of their own. It's the sort of game the Jaguar hardware should handle in its sleep and gameplay, despite choice of characters this time around, still cling too much to that of the original. With the likes of Toki, Ocean seemingly canned somewhere along the line, Rayman being delayed, etc., Atari must have been screaming for something to go with Bubsy after promising to, quote, rip the guts out of the 16-bit SNES and Genesis, end quote, yet lacked a killer platformer of its own. To myself, it just seemed exactly the sort of game I expected to see as a Commodore CD32 exclusive, and at least there it would have been sold at a much more reasonable price than the Jaguar offering. Yet more expensive genre box-ticking product on Jaguar, sadly. Disclaimer, I must add that I always thought Toki looked awful art design-wise. Same for Switch Death, Deathmatch, Deathwatch. Tiny Toons Adventures looked to be the sole Jaguar platformer with the hope of any real art potential, other than the gorgeous Rayman. Indiana Jag looked too early along to judge. Game is a meh for myself, on any platform. If I want a Sonic experience, I'll fire up the original Sonic on Genesis. Thank you, Mr. Dragon. There are many sources which compare Zool to Sonic, a Sonic competitor or knockoff. Doctor Clu posted a couple examples. Amiga Action magazine shows Zool pushing Sonic over, move over Sonic, Zool's coming through, and a Gremlin advertisement, bad news for hedgehogs. So it was definitely positioned as a Sonic competitor, but I always considered them very different games. To me, both are good in their own ways with their own take on the platforming genre. The Jaguar did lack a really good, impressive platform game until Rayman came out. Rayman, that is episode 32 of this podcast. I'm halfway there. So yeah, box ticking. Platform game check, another platform game check. Doesn't matter that they aren't a huge improvement over 16-bit counterparts, at least we've got them. And you bring up a good point about price. I bought most Jaguar games that came out mostly because they were Jaguar games, and I had disposable income. I didn't factor in the value proposition. Is this $50 game really that much better than a $30 game that I could get on my Super Nintendo? Fanboy logic kicking in, I suppose. Thank you for your feedback, Lost Dragon, and my inbox runneth over with all the magazine scans and research notes on future titles that I'll be covering, so I'm very appreciative of your help. We have an audio submission from Wade of Inversataski and 1632 podcast fame, both really great shows about Atari's 8-bit and 1632-bit computers, focusing on productivity software, which might not sound exciting, but I find it interesting, very interesting, and Wade does an excellent job with those two shows. And Allison too, I suppose. But here's Wade.
Hi Shinto, it's Wade from Inversataski. This submission is for Zool 2. First, let me say that I've played this game only a handful of times over the last 15 years. I don't keep my Jaguar out because, well, frankly, I don't really like it. My game collection, from what I've been told, is the reason.
Dumbo Fiesta!
The Zool 2 reminds me of Bonk on the TurboGrafx without all the headbutting. But hey, you're a ninja, and ninjas are better than pirates, right? But are pirates better than cavemen with anger issues? I don't know. So I found this game a little difficult. The main reason was the small ground mobs that respawn. Those are very annoying, and I guess the lesson here is don't backtrack. Overall, I think this is a game that I could enjoy with some practice, although it might take me a lot of practice. But, you know, it's a game that seems like it could be decent.
Excuse me, Shinto? This is Allison from Inversataski. I think what Wade was trying to say was that he enjoys this game in his collection the most. For what it's worth, he had so much fun playing it, he started to neglect his podcast and left me with all the work.
By the way, I think you're doing a fantastic job on the podcast. Thanks, and keep it up.
Oh yeah, Bonk on the TurboGrafx. I've always really liked the TurboGrafx, but never owned one, or played one. That doesn't make a lot of sense. I guess I'm fascinated with the console the same way that I have a fascination with the Neo Geo, though I've never played one of those either. Not the AES, at least. I do have Bonk's Adventure on the PSP. The PlayStation Network has a small selection of TurboGrafx 16 games. And so I have Bonk, Alien Crush, and Newtopia. I didn't see a lot of similarity. Zool didn't remind me of Bonk at all. Maybe in appearance, a bit, somewhat disproportionately large head, and the wall climbing, but Bonk has more of a realistic setting, jungles and plains, and I'm pretty sure that's exactly what the inside of a dinosaur looked like, whereas Zool 2 is more cartoony. Well, I guess they're both cartoony. I'm talking myself into it. Okay, you're right after all, Wade. The pacing is different, but there are some definite similarities between the two. You are definitely right about the respawning ground enemies. Those can be obnoxious, and you might not have a choice but to backtrack, like if you miss a jump and fall back to the bottom. I know I've improved in this game with practice, though I'm still nowhere close to the level of Austin or Jeremiah JT. My son really enjoyed playing this game with the invincibility cheat. That way, your only barriers are the jumping and the little puzzles and unclimbable walls and the time limit. He actually holds the high score on my cartridge, but that is kind of cheating. You might find some enjoyment in the game that way, you might not, but it's an option. And thank you for the translation, Allison. Our next audio submission is from John.
Shinto, I wanted to thank you for your hard work and dedication in producing the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast. Having tried and failed to develop my own podcast, I admire your persistence and appreciate your goal of shining some well-deserved light on this underappreciated powerhouse. My experience with both the Atari Jaguar and today's game, Zool 2, was quite limited. As a 15-year-old, I remember seeing magazine ads for the Jaguar and being awestruck at the thought of a 64-bit machine. The vibrant screenshot of Trevor McFur with a skeletal boss monster attacking on some ultra-colorful planet seemed to leap off the page towards me. But with limited disposable income, I relied on the generosity of my game-swapping friends for entertainment, and none of them had a Jag. Much later, walking the mall after finishing up a morning shift at Radio Shack, I was shocked to see a Jag for sale at KB Toys for around $30. Without a second thought, I bought it, along with the last two games in the bin, Trevor McFur and Zool 2. Driving home, I was so excited. Excited that I would finally be able to play that 64-bit Trevor game for the first time, and looking forward to showing this amazing machine to my little brother when he got home from school. Sadly, neither Cybermorph nor Trevor lived up to the near magical expectations that I had for them. Only Zool 2 seemed like a solid game. It would have been great if it was set in a ninja world, but something about the candy-filled, colorful levels didn't mesh with the cool-looking ninja guy on the cover. On the gamer scale, I give it a solid. There was a little bit too much of the candy stuff, and as a completionist, it was hard to get everything on the levels. As a mascot, I think it was somewhat forgettable compared to the other mascots of the day. I remember the Cube Boss rotating toward the screen, which at that time impressed me, but not enough that I could risk letting my younger brother think I was anything less than cool. So I came up with a plan. I would tell my little brother that one of my friends had let me borrow it. That way I could show him the games without him knowing that I had made this uncool purchase. I then quickly called up one of my video game deprived friends, making him an offer he couldn't refuse. The Jaguar and games would be his, but only if he would pretend from that day forward that he had bought it from KB and not me. He wisely agreed, and I foolishly gave up the system after we finished borrowing it. Now, thanks to your podcast, I realize what a fool I was. On your first episode, when you talked about how hyped you were in advance of its launch, and how you told kids at school about it, I was groaning inside, thinking, poor Shinto. I know how this story will end, but I am so glad I was wrong. I'm so glad you believed in its potential and were able to discover the best it had to offer. Shinto, I'm so thankful that you decided to share your experience with the Jaguar with us, allowing me to live vicariously through you. There's so much I didn't know about the Jaguar. I had no idea that Doom, and especially Wolfenstein 3D, looked better than my DOS version. And playing humans in DOS, aka Evolution Dino Dudes, I always felt like it should have sound effects. And lo and behold, there they are, right there in the Jaguar. And man, Tempest 2000, I would have loved that game. I can guarantee you that. I just really appreciate all the work and research you put into the show. I know the information for Doom actually helped me out just recently. I had been playing Doom a while back, and I saw the chainsaw. I couldn't remember how to get that first chainsaw. Searched, tried to open all the walls. But on your show, you mentioned that some walls have to be shot. And you can tell because they don't make sound effects when you try to open them. That inspired me to try again, and sure enough, there's a particular wall that you have to shoot. So you have helped me in non-Jaguar ways. I also appreciate your personal anecdotes that you sprinkle throughout each episode. It's been great getting to know you better, and also it's been interesting to see how our childhood experiences sort of parallel in some ways. I'm looking forward to your future episodes. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go hunt down that friend and find out what he did with my Jaguar. Have a great one.
John, I think I would like someday to play the Trevor McFur game that existed in my mind when first gazing at those magazine screenshots. It doesn't have to be on the Jaguar, probably wouldn't be, but the disparity between the screenshots and the actual game, well, the screenshots are 100% true, but can lead the imagination into a world that is only superficially reproduced by the actual game. A gigantic howling skeletal creature emerging from the swirling mists of a desolate yet still visually striking world. Yeah, I want to play that game. While you're at it, how about a stronger default weapon and some hit points on my spaceship? Maybe some fitting gameplay music and different sound effects. Your story, it makes me sad, empathetic. You have this excitement for a video game console, you find one in a couple games for a good price, and are so let down that you pretend it's not actually yours, following through with a ruse by giving it away, just to save face with your brother. I get it, but I'm sad it turned out that way. Huge disappointments replacing big excitements. That sort of thing really bothers me. Regarding Zool 2, I think I had a similar first impression. It's kind of a serious character in a cartoony world, a strange dichotomy, and it kind of works. It does get easier after the initial shock. Thank you for your feedback, John. One thing I've learned doing this podcast is that I'm not alone in weird in my life history and personal experiences and esoteric preferences. I, in fact, have a lot in common with a lot of people, and that's a fantastic thing. When else in history could this have happened, to meet so many people with similar interests? It's a good time to be alive. It's like living in the future. Our final audio submission is from Doctor Clu. You may remember him from such episodes as Bubsy and Fractured Furry Tales.
Hey, this is Dr. Clu, and today I'm here to talk about one of the mascots on the Atari Jaguar, Zool, who is actually my fourth favorite, probably. For me, it would probably have to be Bubsy first, as you probably heard on the Bubsy podcast episode. Then probably Rayman or Soccer Kid. It's kind of interchangeable at that point, with Zool being fourth. But, yeah, the Jaguar was pretty good at pulling in all the second stringers from all the various platforms. You know, we got... rather than getting Mario or Sonic, we got Bubsy. Rather than getting, some of the major ones like Soccer Kid. I guess that's a 3DO mascot. And then we wound up getting Zool, which is an Amiga mascot, which is kind of neat. Not exactly an Amiga mascot, but more of a mascot of Gremlin Soft, as I'm sure Shinto's talked all about already. So, anyway, I'm just kind of doing a little vocal review of what I wrote on Atari Age. I wrote this written review. I'm not going to say it word for word, but I'm going to kind of give the spirit of what I actually wrote in that thing I wrote. And basically, the one thing I really liked about Zool, aside from its gameplay also had its problems, but I really liked the music. I'm a big fan of mods, and basically Zool made a big effort to use a lot of mods in their games. So for me, I'm kind of going with the mod music while I'm giving my review. I'm looking at this Amiga Action cover. It says, "Move over, Sonic." Zool storming through. Shows Zool kind of pushing Sonic out of the way. Yeah, he was kind of interesting. He's very Sonic-like. I have to say that when I first got my Jaguar, I was getting games. And I think Zool was probably one of those that I got that was cheap, picked off eBay more than likely. And this is a good game. I remember playing it with my friends' kids, and as I'm playing it, they were pretending to be ninjas and all that. And where they wouldn't play Bubsy, because Bubsy was so hard, and I'd hand the controller to them and they would start crying, Zool was one of those where they actually would give it a shot, and they actually enjoyed it. So it's one thing that was definitely, I think, in Zool's favor as far as that goes. So let's start with the music. And of course, there's the title screen. I remember seeing it for the first time. You get those sinister eyes of that gremlin, and it's all scary. And then all those wacky sound effects start coming in. And so it starts off with this theme of, to me, it's like, all right, here's something pretty scary, but oh, wait a minute, it's being wacky and silly, so okay, I guess it's okay. And that was kind of a nice little touch. It's almost like when they made the opening title, they were trying to use like every last sound effect they possibly could, possibly showing off all the sound ability of the Amiga. So, kind of neat. Then you go from that to the Swan Lake theme. And Swan Lake with all the candy and everything, I really like that one because of just all the wanton destruction you could do. You could just zip around, spin around, crack open those eggs, and candy would go flying everywhere and all that. And of course, in this one, you wind up getting the Chupa Chups, as it were. And I never really saw any actual Chupa Chups candy until I was in Germany. I was passing through on my way to and from Kuwait, and we stopped off at a German airport. And of course, we had to stay in there, in the actual holding area. But they had gift shops and everything. And in there, they actually had a lot of, Chupa Chups candy. So I was really tempted to pick that up, but I didn't. So there you go. But anyway, I really like the Swan Lake level. And I always thought it was funny how in every copy of Zool I've seen, they always have the candy level. And then, of course, in Bubsy, you also have the candy level. So I always thought it'd be kind of cool if you could splice footage of, Zool and Bubsy kind of fighting it out or something. I always thought that'd be kind of neat. So then we go to Blueberry Hill. Blueberry Hill has this kind of electronic sound to it. Yeah, it's just a very interesting little level. I like it because, of course, it has all the electricity and the light bulbs and everything like that. And I really like how you can go off in these little side tunnels and be ping-ponged around like a pinball. So I thought that was a creative little bit of planning for the level. Followed by that, you got the Tutankhamun. And for some reason, all these platformers had to have an Egyptian level. Bubsy 2 had an Egyptian level, and for some reason Zool had to have one as well. I don't know why. And to me, as cute as the song is, it starts off with the beat and everything, kind of the belly dance music. It's probably one of the more forgettable levels on the whole game, to be honest. I really don't remember very much about it. However, that one is followed up by the Snaking Pass, which is made memorable by the flying snake that you can at some points hop on and fly around on. This song right here is probably my favorite of the entire Zool soundtrack. And if I listen to no other song on the Zool soundtrack, just kicking around, listening to music at work or whatever have you, this is the one song I'll listen to. Matter of fact, I'm actually tempted if I ever hack Bubsy at some point, just to see if I can hack in this song. It'd be kind of neat. And of course there's some other mods that I'd love to hack in as alternates as well, though I love a lot of the Bubsy soundtrack, probably just because I've gotten used to it over time. And this one's followed by Mount Isis. And Mount Isis is true to its name. Basically you got a lot of climbing up stuff and a lot of slippery stuff, and that is just the most frustrating combination you can possibly have, because of just how the control scheme is in Zool. So, I remember the levels looked pretty cool in the Mount Isis levels, and aside from that, not too much more to write home about. Yeah, about the Zool characters. Of course, in the first Zool game you had Zool, in the second game you had Zool, and you had Zooz. Zooz is the female character. And of course, as has probably been explained, they have differing abilities. And of course, they have their dog Zoon, who's a bit of a shapeshifter. And I always thought that Zool, especially with Zune, was a lot like Marvin the Martian. So I always thought there was kind of that aspect to him, especially with the way his head's all rounded off and everything. So there you go. One thing about the characters is, when it came to Bubsy, I collected everything I possibly could find on eBay, and of course things turn up every blue moon that's new. You had various toys and all kinds of other things, and so at one point when I'd collected everything I could for Bubsy, I turned my attention on Zool and on Soccer Kid to see if I could collect some of those mascot franchise. When it came to Zool, I started to collect some games. Like I got the first Zool game, that's the Japanese version, which for some reason is now worth hundreds of dollars. I don't know why. But I picked that up, and I think somewhere along the way I saw some little plastic Zool toys that were like maybe, I want to say like McDonald's line or something. I'm not really 100% sure on that. So there's that. And the thing about Zool is there's just so many different versions on so many different platforms. Bubsy's on about 7 platforms, and actually I think Zool exceeds that. So it's really fascinating. I really liked how he was even on like Game Gear and a couple of other little handheld platforms. And of course Soccer Kid, one thing that I guess we can talk about later on, in a later episode, is how that one, Soccer Kid, actually had a little plushie that came with the Game Boy Advance game. So that much was kind of neat. So there you go. But the thing I gotta say about Zool, while he was an agile character, he was kind of a dull character in my opinion. He wasn't loved like Sonic. He wasn't hated like Bubsy. He was just kind of there. Bubsy would show some characters. He would say some phrases, which I think is what made Bubsy really unique, was the fact that Bubsy would talk. And Bubsy got bored. He would rap on the screen and make the knocking sound like you're knocking on glass. Zool just didn't really do anything like that. He was just basically a 2D action hero. So, I don't know. With the Amiga version, I saw the intro on that. It kind of gives a little bit more of a character, a little bit more character for Zool, as he kind of winks at the screen and runs along. But for the most part, there was that. The one positive I have to say to Zool, though, is at least he got his sidekick Zune, and of course Zooz in there. I think the mascots and the dog kind of gave him a little bit more character in the end. Overall, I think Electronic Gaming Monthly said it best, that basically Zool sports great graphics but ends up with a case of super troll lens disease. Your character moves much too fast and with low control. And that is, of course, aside from the fact that he's a character that you neither love nor hate. He's just kind of there. And of course, the pace is also a bit frantic, I also found too. But I do believe that Zool is fun in bursts. And if you're looking for a game where you don't die instantly like Bubsy, and you can zip along like Sonic, then Zool 2 instantly delivers. But for me, it's not a game I pick up very often. I may play it on the Jaguar High Score Game Club every now and then, just to see if I can pull in a score or throw a score in there. And here's another thing too. One of the reasons why I actually stopped collecting Zool merchandise is, out of all the Zool versions I saw, the Jaguar version really was the best. So it really wasn't need to look much further than that. So, not the best platformer, but I'm glad this Gremlin traveled from the nth dimension to the Amiga and Jaguar dimension, and to give us another game. And that's always a good thing. So with that, this is Dr. Clu signing off.
Thank you, Dr. Clu. That's a good point, the Jaguar getting the second stringers, the also-ran franchises. I remember there was a lot of demand for a Mortal Kombat game on the Jaguar. I see that in the letters to the editor in Electronic Gaming Monthly. But we don't get Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, we get Dragon the Bruce Lee Story and Double Dragon 5. There are some AAA franchises on the Jaguar, though. NBA Jam, Doom, Rayman would become one. Zoop, does Zoop count? Funny thing about the Zool 2 Egyptian level, Tutankhamun. Whenever I would think about it while researching this episode, the music from the Bubsy Egyptian world would come to mind. Over and over it happened. I like the Swan Lake music the best, but I think Snaking Pass would probably come in second, especially when the percussion kicks in. It's nicely done. I never got much of a Marvin the Martian vibe from Zool, a big Marvin the Martian fan that I am. Both my best man and I wore at least one hidden article of Marvin the Martian apparel at my wedding. That's okay, my wife is a big fan too, and she was totally okay with that. I've heard that comparison a lot, Zool somewhat like Marvin, but it's not a connection that I ever made personally. Collecting Zool toys and things. I had never even considered that there would be stuff like that out there, but as kind of a mascot for a popular UK game developer, it does seem reasonable. Zool did grace a large number of platforms, didn't he? Let's see, I count 11 for Zool 1 and 6 for Zool 2. That includes both the Amiga computers and the CD32 and the late release BlackBerry ports. You're right, I saw several reviewers say that Zool as a character is kind of dull. He looks cool, he's rich with moves and abilities, but somehow doesn't seem to have much personality. In the CD32 animation you mentioned for Zool 2, he's running, kind of showing off, and smacks right into mental block. The animation is pretty bad, honestly, the movement doesn't feel natural. And I don't know that Zool gets much personality out of a clip like that. I want him to be an awesome, intimidating ninja, not an angry, showboating klutz. But yeah, nothing that I've seen solidifies in a good, solid personality for the Zool character. Great job on the audio submission, Doctor Clu, and everyone, John and Wade. Those were all nicely produced submissions. Something I like about audio feedback is that you don't have to listen to my dry reading of it. You can make it your own personality and music and sound effects if you want. So, Bishop, give me Skylar clip number 9, please.
Well done.
Yes, there you go. That is all I have for Zool 2. Thank you for joining me. It turned out rather longer than I expected, and there is a little bit more to go. I have a general announcement, as well as some story time coming up after the music. But if you're only interested in Nth Dimension ninjas, you can safely skip this part. Coming up next episode, we have Val d'Isere Skiing and Snowboarding, followed by Brutal Sports Football, Double Dragon 5, and Pinball Fantasies, in that order. If you have opinions or memories about these upcoming games, anything I've already covered, or feedback about the show in general, please send that in, text or audio, to jaguar@gamebygamepodcast.com. All show information, including links and progress on the next episode, this can be found on the web at jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com. If you're not sticking around for the announcement or story time, or even if you are, please remember that there is a lot of good to be found out there in this world of ours, even with widely ridiculed video game consoles, so do try to keep an open mind and a joyful heart. Thank you for listening. Hey, it's announcement time. I wanted to let everybody know that
I got a new processor.
Well, yeah, Bishop got an upgrade a couple weeks ago, much needed and well-deserved.
Look at all these CPU cores. It feels gigantic.
Well, compared to what you were running before, I guess, but that's not really... Wait, that's not the announcement. What are you doing? No, the announcement is... This is something that I've considered doing for a long time since I launched the podcast. There is not enough Jaguar merchandise out there, and I don't mean the games and hardware, I mean swag, Jaguar-related shirts and mugs and posters and things. There was that Jaguar catalog back in '94, but honestly, some of those things are kinda lame. Now, anyone can take the Jaguar logo and slap it on a t-shirt, not legally perhaps, Atari Infogrames probably still owns the copyright on all that. But what I wanted to do was create some original designs, original Jaguar-related designs, and make them available to people who might appreciate them, who would get the reference. So I created a store on Redbubble, where I've got over a dozen different designs, well, a couple are variations on a theme, but all of them are original, and some more or less overt in their Jaguar-ness. But you can get posters, hoodies, t-shirts, laptop skins, phone cases, that sort of thing. So check out the store, show your Jaguar love, even if most people wouldn't get the reference, at least you'll know you're cool. Proceeds go toward funding and supporting the show. Libsyn hosting fees add up. A lot of people set up Patreon accounts or tip jars, and that's fine, but it's not something that I personally feel comfortable doing. I'm terrible at asking for money, so I'll let Redbubble do it. My favorite designs on the store are the Real Games and the Red Iron Soldier. You'll know it when you see it. So hopefully they're clever and have some artistic merit and might be something you'd like to wear or drink coffee from or hang on your wall or whatever. The link is in the show notes and will be going forward, and it's also on jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com. So support the show, get some hopefully cool Jaguar-related stuff, or not. It's just something I really wanted to do, to put out there.
And now, story time with Shinto.
I wanted a CD-ROM drive for my computer, probably 1993 or early 1994. My computer only had 2 drive bays, both of which are full of floppy drives, so I was thinking an external CD-ROM. But those things were expensive back then, $300 or $400 easy. But I had been eyeing a game console called the Turbo Duo. As I said before, talking about Bonk's adventure with Wade's feedback, I always had a fascination with the TurboGrafx 16 console and its games. I almost bought one once. Toys R Us was closing them out at $50 each, and I was looking at those, then drove to Babbage's, which is kind of next door. It was my favorite place for Lynx and Super Nintendo games, and I asked the guy behind the counter if he thought the TurboGrafx was a good deal for $50. He said no, it's not even worth $50, so I should steer clear. I took his advice, but that fascination with this exotic console didn't wane. So the Turbo Duo was out, and I heard that TTI was developing a computer interface board for the console, so you could use it not just as a game system, but also as an external CD-ROM drive, all for $300, plus whatever that interface would cost. Seemed like a pretty good deal. Knowing me, I probably heard about this on the TV show Computer Chronicles, and I found that particular episode on archive.org. There will be a link to the whole thing in the show notes. But here's the relevant audio. It runs for about 30 seconds and starts 17 minutes into the episode.
I want to turn to you now, John. You guys have an interesting solution, too. In your Turbo Duo game console, you're actually selling a card now that will let this run as an external CD-ROM drive into your personal computer, right?
Correct. It'll be a CD-ROM card or interface that allows you to use SCSI interface from a Mac or IBM, which virtually turns our Turbo Duo game system into a CD-ROM drive for an IBM PC or a Macintosh.
Okay, this is obviously a prototype of the card. It's not going to quite look
Correct,
like that,
yeah.
but you've got this plugged in here now. Show me that this actually works. We have the same Sherlock Holmes game up we had before on the Apple Drive, and that's running off the Turbo Duo.
It goes on from there. He shows off a Lords of Thunder prototype, so check out the whole episode if you want. Also, if you'd like to learn more about the show Computer Chronicles, the Retro Hour podcast recently conducted an interview with founder and host Stuart Chaffee. It's a fantastic interview. I really enjoyed it, so there will be a link in the show notes to that episode. Getting back to the Turbo Duo, I waited and waited, but this computer interface was never released. The CD-ROM drive prices fell well below the $300 mark, so I never invested in the Duo console, and bought a regular CD-ROM drive for my computer. In the early days of CD-ROMs, it seems that many companies didn't really know what to do with all that storage, the gratuitous number of megabytes contained on a CD, 5 times the size of my hard drive at the time. I was at Walden Software, and they were selling something called the 5-foot 10-pack. This was a collection of CDs in a linear fold-out package that measured 5 feet long and contained 10 discs. One of the discs was an index of other CD-ROMs out there to give you an indication of the we don't really know what we're doing vibe. But there are some other things in there as well. King's Quest V, Stellar 7, Shareware Doom. They said, we know it's just shareware, but it's so hot we couldn't resist including it in this 5-foot 10-pack. That's from memory, the exact quote may differ somewhat. But one of the discs, and the reason this connects to Zool too, contained a collection of animations and DOS programs to play them. Some of these animations were FLC or FLV files, I think, Autodesk animations, and featured computer-generated imagery, things like a rotating Venus de Milo statue. I'm sure Autodesk could animate other things, not just CGI, but this CD, this hodgepodge collection of stuff on CD, is what I thought of when I first loaded up Zool 2 and saw that animation, and I wasn't all that impressed. I was going to talk about Zotz Pops. These were lollipops in various flavors, which had a center filled with white fizzy stuff, kind of like Pop Rocks, which would fizz and bubble, oozing out as you reached the center of the lollipop. In high school, these were used as some sort of fundraiser. Students would walk around and sell Zotz Pops to other students. I had a friend named Greg. He thought I was smart and maybe easily manipulated, so he had a proposal for me. He would pay me $20 cash and throw in his entire box of Zotz Pops if I were to do some history report for him. I'd write the report, he'd hand it in as his own work, nothing too great to stand out and be suspicious, but sufficient to earn a passing grade. He was right, I was easy and cheap, took the Zotz Pops as a down payment, and wrote his report for him. Cheap and easy, sure, but also kind of lazy. We had a set of encyclopedias at home, Funk and Wagnalls from like 1971. I looked up the topic and copied the encyclopedia word for word and gave that to Greg. Copying a school-owned encyclopedia would have been too obvious, I figured, so something a decade or two older and more obscure would have been harder to trace. Greg got a B on the report, was thoroughly happy, and gave me my $20. I'm not proud of it, the cheating and the plagiarizing. It was wrong, but hey, $20. I did get kind of burned out on Zotz Pops, though. That's it for Storytime. Thank you for sticking with me, and I'll talk to you again in the next episode.